Chapter 13-14. As the golden bug grew larger, the blood-red line on its back became more and more dazzling, as if it were about to flow out. Its demonic aura was also so dense that it seemed to be solid. At this time, it seemed that the power of the essence qi had been exhausted. The golden bug swayed and turned back into the pale-faced youth. When Zhang Quan landed on the ground, he was full of energy. He felt his strength had increased again, and he seemed to have gained a few more divine abilities. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. He knelt down and kowtowed. "Thank you for the treasure, Master." Zhang Yan looked at him and nodded. "Based on your current situation, you should be able to make a breakthrough after obtaining 7 or 8 more strands of this qi. At that time, you will be able to compete with the demon saints." Zhang Chan's spirit was lifted. "Master, which demon saint do you want me to kill?" Zhang Yan smiled. "I don't need to spend so much effort just to deal with one demon saint. At this moment, the demon saints of Heavenly Ghost are either gathered at Shocking Sky Mountain or at the border between the 2 continents. The rear can be said to be very empty. After you succeed, I need you to sneak into their hinterland. No matter what means you use, disturb and weaken their strength as much as possible, and shake their hearts." Zhang Quan said, "I don't dare to not do my best." He hadn't spent all these years in vain. He had devoured all the insects in the mountain and sea realm, and he didn't know how many of them he had. Many of the tribes of demons, devils, and other species had been easily slaughtered by him because they didn't have a demon saint to lead them. The reason why Zhang Yan didn't do anything to the Heavenly Ghost tribe in the Western Desolate Domain was because it was too far away. Those who could go there had to be at the level of Taoist Heavenly Abode. However, if they were targeted by a demon saint of Heavenly Ghost, they would be injured or killed. Even if they killed some of the Heavenly Ghost tribe, the loss would outweigh the gain. But Zhang Quan was different. He could hide in the back and let his insects serve him. Moreover, as a demon, he was not as conspicuous a target as a human cultivator. After all, the conflict between the Heavenly Ghost tribe and the demons had lasted for tens of thousands of years. Although they had killed all the demon ancestors in the Desolate Domain, the battle between the two had not ended. He raised his sleeves and said, "That essence qi isn't that easy to dissolve. This time, you've only absorbed 30 to 40% of it. There's still a lot hidden in your flesh. Withdraw and circulate your energy first. Come back in 3 days and I'll give you another strand of qi." Zhang Quan said, "I understand." He kowtowed again. He took his leave. At this time, Jingyu walked out of the hall and placed a jade box on the table. He said, "Master, this was sent by Lu Jinren and Tian Jinren. They said that it was this item that caused heavy casualties to the Blue Feather Pavilion cultivators and the dragon demons." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and opened the box. He picked up the crystal sand residue and immediately determined that it was definitely the work of a Qi Dao cultivator, but it was different from the 2 disciples. However, he could see something deeper from it. This item has only been refined for a short period of time, definitely no more than 30 years. His eyes flickered. From this item, he could infer that there was at least one cultivator behind Heavenly Ghost tribe who was proficient in artifact refining. But did this person come from beyond the heavens, or had he been hiding in the Heavenly Ghost tribe all along? There was no information about this person in the message sent by Sima Quan. Obviously, this person was only known by the upper echelons of the Heavenly Ghost tribe. Only people of this level could not infiltrate because of the means left behind by Guizhu. This caused him to see another problem. Refining this treasure obviously required a lot of precious materials. Not to mention that, it was very likely that the Heavenly Ghost tribe had personally intervened in this matter, using such a well-hidden person. Just to kill and injure hundreds of junior cultivators? Wasn't this making a big fuss over a minor issue? Or was there some other purpose hidden in it? Zhang Yan thought for a while and smiled coldly. He raised his finger and pointed at the air, condensing a talisman. He handed it to Jingyu and said, "Take it to Yan Yi and the others." Mountain and Sea Realm. Hua Yi Continent. This was the location of Blue Feather Pavilion's newly established sect. However, in the previous battle with the Heavenly Ghost Tribe, more than 500 cultivators had left, but by the time they returned, only less than half remained. Moreover, they were the elites of the sect. Also lost were the thousands of spirit birds that they had painstakingly raised. It could be said that they had suffered heavy losses. If Blue Feather Pavilion hadn't received the protection of the Qinsang school back in the 9 continents, which increased the sect's power by several times and allowed it to accumulate some foundation, and not a single Taoist Yuanying was lost, it was likely that this loss alone would cause the entire sect to collapse. It was just that the disciples of the Yen clan had originally dominated Blue Feather Pavilion, but after the battle, only a dozen or so people had returned alive. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the situation in the sect was about to change. If it were any other sect, there would certainly be external branches fighting for power. However, because Blue Feather Pavilion had Han Zuocheng, anyone who thought of the tyrannical background behind him would immediately extinguish any wild thoughts in their hearts. In the spring warm mountain, Yan Zixian's face was pale, and his whole body was soaked in the medicinal pool. The pool water was rolling as if it was boiling, and wisps of black smoke could be seen coming out of the acupoints on his body. In that battle, because he was at the forefront, he was also seriously injured, but because he had a protective profound weapon and a precious pill given by Yan Xiaoyang in advance, he was able to survive. However, because the injury was too serious, he still hadn't fully recovered. There were even some cultivators who thought that after seeing him, he would be able to recover. It was also because his Tao foundation was damaged, and if he didn't have spirit pills and precious medicine, his cultivation would probably not be able to progress further. Footsteps came from the stone steps, and a Daoran appeared in front of him, with a handsome goshawk standing on his shoulder. When Yan Zixian saw this, he knew that this was the junior brother of the previous sect leader. Even Yan Xie was very respectful when she saw him, so he didn't dare to be rude. He hurriedly struggled and called out, "Daoist master." When Daoran saw this, he took a few steps forward and stretched out his hand to press him down. A gentle magic power came down and held him down, saying, "Since your injury hasn't healed, there's no need to move around, lest your foundation is shaken." Yan Zixian nodded and said, "Then forgive me for being rude." After saying that, he took the opportunity to lie down. That Daoran looked at him and said, "Zixian, great-nephew, the sect leader asked me to tell you that today's matter is all Zhenren Yan's fault, and it has nothing to do with others. You don't need to worry about this. Now that you've returned to the sect, you just need to rest and recuperate. No one will make things difficult for you." Yan Zixian cupped his fists and said, "Zhenren, please thank the sect leader for his care and concern for me." That Daoran made a sound of acknowledgement, then he stroked the goshawk and said, "Daoran, this Jian Ling, can dispel impurities for people, but it has to examine you. If you feel any discomfort, please bear with it." "Thank you, Zhenren." Yan Zixian responded to him. As soon as the goshawk looked at him fiercely, a sharp light shone down and illuminated Yan Zixian's body, so much so that even his internal organs and bones were exposed. In a split second, Yan Zixian had an illusion that he was being seen through. The goshawk withdrew its gaze after some time and screeched at Daoran. Daoran chuckled and responded, "Disciple-nephew Zixian, you're lucky that your Yuanying isn't damaged, so it's not a big deal. I've seen people who were more seriously injured than you during the devil disaster back then, but they all recovered in the end. You should be fine after recuperating for 1.5 years, so take good care of yourself. I'll be leaving now." Following that, he turned around and left, but he thought, "I didn't see any signs of being possessed by evil spirits, so there shouldn't be a problem. I also need to take a look at my nephews to prevent any mistakes." Yan Zixian watched as Daoran left, then he lay back down and fell into a deep sleep, allowing the medicinal power to seep into his body. At that moment, a ghost face appeared behind him. It looked outside vigilantly and thought to itself, "Fortunately, I'm prepared, or Daoran would have seen through me." At this moment, Yan Zixian had actually been possessed by a heavenly ghost demon saint, and even he himself hadn't noticed this. The heavenly ghost tribe had a technique to seize the body of another tribe, but this technique was more subtle. It only attached itself to the other party's blood, and the person would still be the same person, but the person would be subtly influenced and eventually be used by the heavenly ghost tribe. The act of killing hundreds of cultivators with the treasure light was actually a trap, but the real purpose was to do it. In fact, in order to successfully carry out this plan, there were as many as 6 demon saints hidden among the tens of thousands of heavenly ghosts. In order to prevent the cultivators of the 9 continents from noticing anything unusual, they had already dispersed most of their chi and blood, leaving only enough to activate the technique of possession. But in the end, he was the only one who succeeded. This arrangement was very secretive. Even the cultivators of the 9 continents did not expect that the heavenly ghost tribe would sacrifice tens of thousands of people and several demon saints just to plant a spy. It turned out that the heavenly ghost tribe disdained to do this. It was just that the lord of the heavenly ghost tribe, Yao Zhe, felt that he had repeatedly been at a disadvantage against the cultivators of the 9 continents, and his side knew too little about this enemy, so he made this arrangement. Next to the Moon Cauldron Lake, Fang Xinan was cultivating. Suddenly, a gloomy-looking Daoren walked in. When Fang Xinan saw him, he hurriedly stopped his cultivation, stood up, and bowed, saying, "Master." Sima Quan said, "I'm here to tell you that I've been patrolling the area where you've been fighting for the past few days, and I've discovered something very interesting." Fang Xinan knew that if it was a small matter, it would not be worth coming here. His expression became serious, and he asked, "What is it?" Sima Quan said, "In that battle, at least a few strands of the divine soul of a demon saint appeared. A few of them were destroyed, but one disappeared without a trace." Fang Xinan had also cultivated in the heavenly palace of mysterious Yin, so how could he not understand the meaning of this? He said in horror, "Master, are you saying that a heavenly ghost might have infiltrated my disciple's body?" Sima Quan sneered. "The heavenly ghost thinks that it's done secretly, but it doesn't know that in front of me, it's still too immature and crude." A cold light flashed in Fang Xinan's eyes. He said, "Master, just who is it? I'll go find out right away." However, Sima Quan shook his head. "You can keep this person alive." Fang Xinan was slightly surprised. He thought for a moment, and said in a low voice, "Master, are you trying to lure a big fish to the bait?" Sima Quan smiled deeply. If this person is eliminated, the heavenly ghost tribe is very likely to send someone else. Keeping him alive is actually a good thing. Sometimes, even if it's true, if we don't reveal everything, and it spreads to the outside world, it may turn out differently. Chapter 13-15. 2 months later, in the Sky Green Hall. Zhang Chan swallowed the 7th wisp of essence qi. He had been circulating essence qi for the past few days, so he was already very experienced. Feeling that his divine power had improved again, he leaped up from the ground and said to his master, "Master, I am now strong enough to compete with those demon saints." Zhang Yan looked at him and felt that it was time to let him out. He said, "There are still 2 demon saints imprisoned in the sect. They were captured a few days ago and are going to be sent to the earth furnace. You can try to fight with them and know their abilities. It will be convenient for you to do things." Zhang Chan's expression tensed up. He bowed and said, "Then I'll go. I don't want to be eaten by that ferocious creature if I'm late. I don't know how long I'll have to wait." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go." Zhang Chan kowtowed and hurried out of the hall. It was not that he was too impatient, but there was a reason for it. After Tao Zhenren refined several kinds of dragon demons, all the sects in the 9 continents saw the value of this demon and wanted to give one to their disciples and elders. However, the number of dragon demons produced by that ferocious creature depended on the number of demons it swallowed. In order to satisfy this ferocious creature's appetite, the cultivators of the 9 continents were sent out to capture demons. But as these activities became more frequent, the number of demons and other worldlings outside the frigid Jade Ocean province became fewer and fewer. There were even scenes of demon tribes fleeing whenever cultivators showed up. Many sects had no choice but to search for them in the north. Some even brought medicinal pills and magic treasures to the eastern wasteland kingdom to trade. Under such pressure, if Zhang Chan was late, the two demon saints might fall into the ferocious creature's stomach. After Zhang Yan beat up Zhang Chan, he meditated in the hall and used the pure purple spiritual opportunity. Another month passed in a flash. There was a huge shadow approaching outside the hall, causing the brilliance in the hall to dim. Zhang Yan looked over. It was the intercept demon who went to deliver the refined jade to the two sect leaders. However, its aura seemed to be stronger than before. Needless to say, it must have obtained some benefits from the two sect leaders. He smiled and stood up. Stepping on the intercept demon's wide back, the demon let out a roar and brought him into the void. In the dense forest, a group of people were flying on spirit birds. After the last battle, Fang Xinan led hundreds of cultivators to search for the whereabouts of the heavenly ghost tribe. He could be considered lucky. In just a few months, he ran into a heavenly ghosts hiding in the area. There were about several thousand of them. However, after the previous lesson, they were much more careful. When they attacked, they would not put their people in one place. The strength of this settlement wasn't that great. In less than 2 hours, the battle ended. After the matter was over, he looked around. He saw that the mountains and rivers were beautiful, the scenery excellent. He was also moved. He ordered the cultivators to open up a cave here, preparing to operate it as a base. Just as everyone was arranging formation flags, a cultivator suddenly pointed to the sky and said, "Taoist master, someone is coming." Fang Xinan looked up and saw an immortal crane appear in the sky. There was a young cultivator standing on it. At that moment, he seemed to have seen everyone and descended from the sky. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother Fang." Fang Xinan recognized this person as a fellow Taoist with the surname Hong from the Clear Feather sect. He also cupped his hands and bowed. "So it's senior brother Hong. Do you have any instructions for me, Taoist master?" The cultivator with the surname Hong said, "You're half right. I'm under the orders of the Taoist master to bring the newly born dragon demon to you." Fang Xinan's eyes lit up. "We lost quite a lot previously. Senior brother, you really provided timely assistance." The cultivator with the surname Hong said with a slightly deep voice, "Taoist master, you've also heard about that battle. Fortunately, senior brother Fang was able to command us well. Our Clear Feather sect disciples did not suffer any losses." Fang Xinan only smiled. He didn't say anything. The cultivator with the surname Hong also knew that it wasn't appropriate to mention this. After all, the people who suffered losses in name were fellow Taoists of the 9 continents. He waved his hand and took out a 10,000 beast ring, releasing the thousands of dragon demons inside. These dragon demons had taken medicinal pills beforehand, so they all quietly stayed where they were. None of them moved around. Fang Xinan quickly noticed that there were a few strange-looking dragon demons among the group of dragon demons. They were fat, had short heads, and had small limbs. They looked like meatballs. However, Fang Xinan didn't underestimate them. He turned and asked, "Senior brother Gao, what abilities does this dragon demon have?" The cultivator with the surname Hung smiled and said, "This dragon demon is called Strong Dragon. Taoist master was affected by the previous attack, so he specially ordered that ferocious creature to create this dragon. Although it's huge, it can easily move. Furthermore, it has another ability." At this point, he stretched out a hand, palm facing up, and uttered a few short syllables. When the strong dragon heard the syllables, its body suddenly shrank. From a height of 10 zhang, it shrank to a size of half a foot. It actually became extremely agile, and with a nimble jump, it fell into the cultivator's palm. Fang Xinan and the others all watched. If it could only take on any size, it wouldn't be a big deal. The beast's subduing collar could also fit it, so there must be some other changes. The cultivator with the surname Hung chuckled, looked around, and said, "Everyone, feel free to attack me." Fang Xinan nodded, waved his hand, and said, "Do as senior brother Hong says." The dozen or so cultivators standing to the side didn't hesitate. They immediately took out the magic treasures in their hands and attacked the cultivator with the surname Hong. At this moment, the strong dragon let out a roar, and its body suddenly expanded, turning into a small hill. It actually swallowed the cultivator with the surname Hong in one gulp. No matter what magic treasures came at it, they all sank into its soft and thick flesh, unable to be retrieved for a moment. When Feng Xinan saw this, he immediately said, "Don't hold back." Everyone reacted quickly. Since they weren't afraid of being hit by magic treasures, they used their magic power to attack. In an instant, lightning, water, fire, and clouds rained down. The strong dragon let out another roar. Its fat body shook, and its skin turned red as if it was roasted. Steam rose from it, and a layer of blood energy appeared on the surface of its body. When the light from the spiritual energy landed on it, it was annihilated. Everyone there clicked their tongues in wonder. However, not a single one of the cultivators stopped. Rather, more cultivators kept joining in. All of them wanted to see what the limits of this dragon Yao were. After about 10 breaths of time, the bloody light gradually thinned and finally disappeared without a trace. Next, he could only rely on the body of the demonic dragon to resist. But to be able to last for more than 10 breaths of time under such a siege was already extremely strong. Feng Xinan raised his hand to stop everyone and said, "Brother Hong, please come out." The strong dragon opened its mouth and spat. The cultivator with the surname Hong jumped out. He patted the dragon's fat nose and said, "Everyone, don't underestimate it. We came in a hurry, so this demon dragon hasn't eaten yet. If it eats enough demons, its blood energy will increase by several folds." When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but be moved. If what he said was true, then it was truly extraordinary. If the cultivators of the Blue Feather Pavilion had such a demonic dragon, the result would be very difficult to say. Feng Xinan also felt that this strong dragon could make up for what they lacked. Just as he was about to speak, a cultivator hurried over and cupped his hands. "Sage Feng, Sage Han has summoned us. He wants us to meet up." Feng Xinan's expression turned serious. He asked, "What happened?" The cultivator whispered, "I heard Sage Han found the whereabouts of the Whale King." Feng Xinan was shocked, but he quickly calmed down. He had already expected this result. The cultivator said with a hint of admiration, "Sage Han is indeed correct. This Sage Han is really not simple." Feng Xinan said in his heart, "Of course. If this person really didn't have any ability, why would Zhang Shangzhen send him here?" He looked at the crowd and said loudly, "Everyone, Sage Han has summoned all of you. Those who lost demon dragons a few days ago, go ahead and pick one. Follow me in 2 hours. Northwest of the cold abyss, Lonely Spoon Mountain." The demon insects were all rushing toward the top. At the top of the mountain, Wei Zihong's robe fluttered in the wind. He stood on the shoulder of a giant ape and looked at the sea of insects below. However, his expression didn't change. An illusory dragon flew out from behind him and spun in the air. It rose several thousand feet into the air. The clouds in the sky changed and thunder rumbled. After the giant dragon rose to the highest point, it swung its body and brought with it endless thunder and wind as it swooped down. On a mountain peak 1,000 miles away, dozens of Jade Moon Sect's disciples were watching this scene. They were all very excited when they saw this. Someone shouted, "It's sect leader's Myriad Origins life transformation technique." As they spoke, the dragon landed on the ground. With a loud bang, the earth trembled and an invisible force swept across the world. With this charge, countless demon insects were crushed into pieces. The Worm King that was hiding within the swarm of worms was heavily injured by this strike as well, and it was struck down from the sky. It tumbled a few tens of times in succession while the golden armor on its entire body shattered, and even dirty blood flowed out without end. It seemed to have realized that the situation was bad, so it transformed its body, and its figure suddenly became illusory like smoke. After a while, it had already vanished. Wei Zihong stared at the place where it disappeared. He had defeated the insect swarm like this several times before. However, this demon insect king was very cunning. As soon as it sensed something was wrong, it immediately escaped. After a few months, it was once again the endless sea of insects. However, right at this moment, a ray of clear light fell from the sky and struck a certain place. With a miserable shriek, the originally empty space suddenly turned into a pool of filthy blood. The insect king appeared again and twitched there. After a while, Chi-ju was dead. Wei Zihong laughed heartily. He looked towards the sky and said, "Junior apprentice brother, well done." The clouds parted and Yuan Jianqing came down. He waved his hand and took a shuttle from the demon insect king. Then he landed next to Wei Zihong. He looked at the countless demon insect corpses at the bottom of the mountain and said, "Senior brother, this should be the last demon insect tribe that has matured." Wei Zihong looked around and smiled. Dozens of years of hard work have not been in vain. In the future, this will be the home of my Yao Yin Mountain Gate. With the nourishment of these flesh and blood, the vegetation here will flourish. As he spoke, the aura on his body surged. It was as if the flood that was blocked by the dam had suddenly been released. Yuan Jianqing suddenly felt something. He turned his head and looked surprised. Senior brother's cultivation seems to have broken through. Wei Zihong smiled and said, "I have felt that my opportunity is coming. However, if I don't eradicate these demon insects, the mountain gate will not be stable. I can't let go of everything. Now that I have nothing to worry about, after I report to Master, I will go into closed-door training. However, I don't know when I will come out. I will ask junior brother to take care of my Yaoyin Mountain." Yuan Jingqing's face became serious. He said, "This is a big matter. Senior brother can go into closed-door training. I will take care of everything in the sect." Chapter 13-16. Spring and autumn came and went. Another 10 years passed. In the assembly hall of Heavenly King City, the leaders of the tribes were discussing among themselves. Some people seemed to have different opinions and actually started to argue loudly. The king of the Heaven Ghoul race, Feng Zhe, sat there with a cold expression. He allowed the people below to argue without making a sound. Elder Sui Qingjian looked up and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't. What the clans were arguing about was that the heavenly ghost clans had been attacked by demonic insects in the western desolate domain. Many small clans had been destroyed, and the insect disaster had become more and more intense. Now, everywhere the insects passed, not even a blade of grass could be seen. As a result, the tribes under Shocking Sky Mountain were restless and clamored to look after their clansmen. The tribes at the border of the two continents did not move. Not many were willing to cross the natural chasm and attack the cultivators of the 9 continents. This matter naturally reached Royal City. The tribes had different opinions on this matter. Some people suggested that the attacked tribes should be left alone for now and come back after the matter was dealt with. But some people immediately objected. They thought that if this suggestion was made, the other tribes would follow suit. No one knew how long it would take to gather the tribes again. Just like usual, they argued for an entire day without any results. When it was dusk, Feng Zhe stood up expressionlessly, turned around and left. All the elders were startled for a moment before they dispersed resentfully. Only the 2 elders, Sui Qingjian and He Qihua, stayed. Not long after, attendants came to invite them. The 2 went to the back of the hall and saw Feng Zhe sitting on the seat. They immediately went forward and saluted. The Heaven Ghoul race's leader waved his hand and said, "Elders, at ease. What do you think of the recent events?" Sui Qingjian said angrily, "When one stands up, everyone follows suit. These are a group of selfish people. It was a mistake to give them land back then." Qihua said coldly, "My king is too lenient towards the tribes. Qihua thinks that we should use force. Kill a few of them, and the rest will be obedient." Feng Zhe said calmly, "The crux of all this is the cultivators of the 9 continents. If we can destroy them, everything can be resolved. Since we've come this far, we have to keep going no matter what." Sui Qingjian and Qi Huo looked at each other and said at the same time, "We are willing to serve the king." "Elders, please sit down and talk," said Loz. After the two of them sat down, he continued, "Our clansmen are short-sighted. We also need to make use of the benefits." In reality, the Western Absolute Territory was vast and boundless. Many heavenly ghost tribes were not affected by the insect disaster, but their real purpose was to withdraw from shocking Sky Mountain and not attack the northern cold abyss, so they shouted together. Some people even said that after so many years, the cultivators of the 9 continents didn't come to fight, and the main division didn't make any effort. Instead, they sent these side branches to their deaths, and the patriarch just borrowed the power of the heavenly mandate. The true purpose of delaying this battle indefinitely was to seize the authority of the heavenly Tao. Everyone knew that this was stupid. The ancestral division was high above, naturally they would let their subordinates go first. But the tribes only needed an excuse to oppose, regardless of whether it was reasonable or not, and they allowed such words to spread among their subordinates. Moreover, the matter of sacrificing tens of thousands of people for no reason was revealed by some people. From top to bottom, all the heavenly ghost tribes were dissatisfied. If it wasn't for the deterrence from beyond the heavens and the ancestral division's control of the Million-World Observation Tower, no one could resist them. If no one could resist, there would have been tribes making trouble. Sui Qingjian said, "Does the king have any plans?" Feng Zhe said calmly, "There are 2 urgent matters now. One is the disaster of the demonic insects, which must be caused by the cultivators of the 9 continents. The other is that the tribes can't see any hope of victory, so they are delaying." Here, he paused for a moment and looked at the two. "Let's talk about the first matter first. Since the tribes can't solve the insect disaster, let the ancestral division take action and kill it." Qi Huo said, "That strange insect is extremely cunning, and as long as we don't capture the insect king, it will be useless against the insect demons." Feng Zhe stimulated his blood energy and sand flew up, piling up into the shape of mountains and rivers in the western desolate domain. He walked to the front, stretched out his hand and drew a circle, saying, "The insect king should be here. Our 3 tribes will each send 2 beast saints to keep an eye on it. We don't have to kill it, but it will be enough as long as it can't come out and cause trouble." The 2 elders thought about it and agreed that it was a good idea. Previously, they were only thinking about how to eliminate the insect swarm, but now that they didn't have to do so, things became much simpler. Although some of their forces were restrained, it was still bearable for the thousands of tribes of heavenly ghost. Seeing that the 2 elders didn't object, Feng Zhe said, "Let's talk about the second matter. The cultivators of the 9 continents are very strong, and the person behind them is not simple either. No matter what we do, we can deal with them. Since we can't touch them, we can only change the opponent to open up the situation." Sui Qingjian was puzzled. He asked, "King, who do you want to choose?" Feng Zhe said, "There are 2 choices, the 100 nations of the Eastern Baron and the Heart Butterfly tribe. These 2 tribes are allies of the cultivators of the 9 continents, and they are not strong. It won't be difficult to defeat them, and it can also boost the tribe's morale." Qi Huo's eyes suddenly turned cold. He said, "King, with the strength of our tribes, not to mention winning, it will be easy to destroy these 2 tribes." Sui Qingjian frowned. "The Heart Butterfly tribe is not strong, let alone them. The 100 nations of the Eastern Baron are vast, and I heard that the cultivators of the 9 continents have made arrangements in the palaces. Moreover, the 2 tribes are in frequent contact. If I make a move here, the northern heaven chill abyss will not sit by and watch, it will also send help. It won't be easy to defeat them." Qi Huo looked at Feng Zhe and said, "What do you think, King?" Feng Zhe didn't say anything, and after a long time, he said in a deep voice, "The 100 nations of the Eastern Baron." Sui Qingjian couldn't help but be surprised. He didn't know why King would choose the difficult one. He said, "Why the 100 nations of the Eastern Baron?" Feng Zhe said, "Elder Sui Qingjian overlooked one thing. Attacking the Heart Butterfly tribe may not be easier than attacking the 100 nations of the Eastern Baron. Although they are weak, they are stronger than the northern heaven chill abyss. Although our tribe can go, once we are exposed, we will be targeted by the cultivators of the 9 continents, and it will be difficult for us to come. Only the beast saints of the ancestral tribe can do this, but I can't afford such a loss now. The two elders pondered for a while, and they nodded. The 6 beast saints that were sacrificed to plant spies were chosen from the ancestral tribe. Although there were many beast saints in the ancestral tribe, they were accumulated over thousands of years, and if one died, there would be one less beast saint. As the tribe leaders, they saw these beast saints as the precious wealth of their tribe, and it was painful to lose them like this. Fengzhi said, "The 100 nations of the Eastern Baron are different. Not to mention that they are far away from the northern heaven chill abyss. Even if our tribe is in danger, we can retreat from the 100 southern continent at any time, and we won't cut off our path of retreat." Sui Qingjian said, "But if we do this, the sects of the 9 continents will definitely come to our rescue, and the tribes may try to avoid it." Fengzhi said, "It's fine as long as the people of the ancestral tribe take the lead. Once we get the benefits, they will follow us. Moreover, I am not fighting alone, the one from the 100 southern continent has already agreed to join forces with me." The two elders were shocked. The beast ancestor of the 100 southern continent was rumored to have woken up, and he must not be underestimated. Sui Qingjian said, "But the beast kings of the 100 southern continent may not be willing to help me, and I am afraid they have their own ideas." Fengzhi said, "Of course, but there is one thing you don't need to worry about, they are also acting on orders from their superiors. They may be hindered by small matters, but in the grand scheme of things, they will not turn against me before the cultivators of the 9 continents are eliminated. Also, I can promise that after we conquer the Eastern Barren nations, I will give them all the treasures, people, and territories." Sui Qingjian and Qi Hu looked at each other. It was fine to give them away. The Eastern Barren nations were too far away, and even if they conquered it, they would not be able to control it. Also, before the cultivators of the 9 continents were eliminated, the demons of the 100 southern continent could share the burden for them. After thinking it through, the two stood up and bowed, saying, "Since the king has made up his mind, we will do as you say." Fengzhi said, "Then I will trouble the 2 elders to arrange it." A few days later, the king of the heaven ghoul race, Fengzhi, once again gathered all the tribes for a discussion. With the excuse of cutting off the arms of the cultivators of the 9 continents, they decided to attack the 100 Eastern Barren nations, and promised that apart from the territories, everything they seized would belong to the tribes, and the ancestral tribe would not ask for anything. In these years, the heaven ghoul tribes had repeatedly lost against the cultivators of the 9 continents, and they realized that this opponent was not to be trifled with. However, the 100 Eastern Barren nations did not care about it, and since the ancestral tribe was willing to lead and they could benefit from it, they had nothing to say. As for the 10,000-year agreement with the Eastern Barren nations, no one took it seriously. This was because the one who made the agreement was the Fire Mane Ghost ancestor, and according to demonic ancestor Go Yu, this person had fallen into silence, and without enough sacrifices, he would probably not be able to come again. Sima Quan's avatar had been hiding in Shocking Sky Mountain all this time, and he had added fuel to the fire when the tribes caused trouble before. When he heard of this matter, he immediately sent out the news after coming out of the palace. However, he also knew that since the Heaven Ghoul tribe had decided to invade on a large scale, they had no intention of concealing it. Moreover, before the Eastern Barren nations officially asked for help, the sects of the 9 continents would not take the initiative to send cultivators to help. At most, they would make some preparations in advance. This time, the Heaven Ghoul tribes moved extremely quickly. In just a month, over 100 cloud whales had been mobilized to the plains below Shocking Sky Mountain. Under the leadership of the Lian clan's patriarch, Lian Shao, more than 300 tribes and more than 40 demonic saints boarded the whales back. As clouds and mist rose, the group appeared at the border between the 100 southern Civ continent and the Eastern Barren lands in just a few breaths. It was more than a month's journey to the 100 Eastern Barren nations if they flew. It was not that they did not want to send the Cloud Whale King close. In fact, they had sent one before, but in the past few years, the Eastern Barren nation had expanded rapidly, and they seemed to have mastered a method to find the Cloud Whale King. They found it and imprisoned it, causing the Heaven Ghoul tribe to suffer great losses. Therefore, they could only place the Cloud Whale King at the border between the 2 continents. After they arrived, Lien Shao immediately ordered over 300 clansmen to move out of the World Reflection Tower. He asked them to build a sturdy palace in 3 months. Then, he left 2 beast saints to guard the place while he led the rest of the clansmen to the Eastern Wasteland country. Chapter 13-17. Eastern Wasteland Kingdom, Bodu City. This place was known as 8,000 miles long, 7 peaks surround the desolate court. It was the most solid barrier of the 100 nations of Eastern Wasteland. The periphery of the palace city was built with 7 of the most solid golden jade mountains. On the city walls, there were chi and blood patterns left by the 3 high priests. In addition to the defensive formation set up by the cultivators of the 9 continents for decades, even if a demon ancestor came to invade, as long as the people in the city were determined to defend and didn't fight, it wouldn't be hard to defend. It could be said to be impregnable. At this moment, in the 3 Mysteries Hall of the Palace City, the bronze bell rang loudly. After the envoys of Shenfang, Fuxiang, Xianyu, Shuhua, and Zhiye heard it, they put on their hats and robes and walked out of the guest palace. They rode on the cloud-riding carriage and rushed to the hall. After a while, the 5 arrived at the hall. Under the greeting of the ceremonial officer, they walked up the jade stairs. After walking up 100 steps, they could see the main door of the hall. In front of them, there were bronze oxen, jade horses, iron elephants, and golden rhinoceros. On the 2 sides, there were people holding axes and axes. All of them were full of chi and blood. The 5 tidied up in front of the door and walked into the hall. Gongxian Zhao stood in the middle of the hall and waited. When the 5 of them came up, they put their palms together and bowed. Gongxian Zhao also did the same. Then, the sound of bells and drums rang out. He went to the main seat and raised his hands, saying, "Ambassadors of the various countries, please take your seats." The 5 put their hands together and bowed again. Then, they went to their seats. The great mystic cultivator of Shuhua was a straightforward person. Just now, he sat down and said, "Gongyue Ji asked me to wait here. Is there any demon tribe that is causing trouble?" Ever since they formed an alliance with the cultivators of the 9 continents, the 100 nations of Eastern Wasteland had obtained many good things. Their national power had increased greatly. In these dozens of years, they fought demons everywhere and often joined hands to fight against enemies. Therefore, they stationed envoys in Boda City so that they could mobilize the power of the various countries in time. Gongxian Zhao said, "Palace Master Mo, please have a word with everyone." Mo Du said in a deep voice, "I received news 3 days ago that Shenfang's vassal state, Langxian, was destroyed." What? Everyone in the room was moved. Not to mention today, even 500 years ago. This kind of thing was also very rare. Yuanzai widened his eyes and said, "What's going on? Which demon tribe dares to be so bold? Didn't you, Shenfanghua, go and help them?" Although the Langxian kingdom was a small kingdom in the south, its geographical location was different. It was right above the Yunyuan mountain pass and could be considered as the southern gateway for the 100 kingdoms of the eastern wilderness to enter and exit the wasteland. After forming an alliance with the 9 states, it had gained many benefits and even had a great mystic cultivator. Everyone present remembered that they had all sent congratulatory gifts. Mo Du shook his head and said, "I couldn't help in time. By the time I received the news and rushed over, Lang Xiangua had already turned into ruins." The great Xianshi of Xiaoyu, Juyu, asked, "Did your country encounter any mishaps on the way and arrive too late?" Mo Du knew what he wanted to ask and said straightforwardly, "In this matter, Shenfang country has no selfish motives. Lang Xian country has always been respectful and obedient and is also a vassal country of Shenfang country. When encountering an external enemy, how can I abandon it?" After I received the letter asking for help, I immediately mobilized the mystic cultivators in the country and prepared to go and help. At the same time, I sent someone to report that they must hold their ground. However, before we could move, the news of the country's destruction had already arrived. It happened within a day. All the great Xuanzhi's expressions changed. How could this be? Although Langxian country was a small country, it also spent a lot of money to hire the cultivators of the 9 states to set up a restrictive formation. Then, there were great xianxue guarding it. All the mystic cultivators in the country could easily defend against an enemy 10 times their size. How could it be destroyed in a short day? Zhu Yu asked, what happened to the Grand Palace Master of this country? Mo Du said in a low voice, he naturally died for the country. Everyone sighed. The country nurtured the cultivators. If there was a day when their country encountered an unstoppable disaster, they would probably make the same choice. At this moment, Gongxi Zhao asked, do you know who the opponent is? Mo Du raised his hand and bowed to the seat, saying, that letter was sent in a hurry, so it was vague. Moreover, there were no traces left in Langxian's country. Everywhere it passed, there were only ruins. The entire country's people were nowhere to be found, as if they had been kidnapped. Not only that, even the 2 strange human tribes that had attached themselves to Langxian's country were also destroyed. Everyone's expression was solemn. They didn't even know who the opponent was. It seemed that they had encountered an unprecedentedly strong enemy. Zhu Yu pondered and said, the enemy came from the south. I think that this is very likely the work of the 100 states of Nanluo. However, Mo Du did not agree. He said, the 100 states of Nanluo do indeed have such power. To be able to destroy a country so easily, there must be at least 20 or more demon saints. However, don't forget that there are also our spies in the 100 states. How could there be no news of such a huge movement? I think that the culprit might be someone else. Yuan Zai slammed the table and said angrily, if it's not this kind of demon, then who could it be? Zhu Yu stroked his beard and said, no matter who it is, this person broke the southern gate of the 100 states. If he didn't retreat, then he must have entered deep into the hinterland of the Cloud Plains. However, I don't know where he went now. Everyone also started to think. At this moment, a scribe came into the hall and held a red scroll high above his head. He said loudly, the country of Xian is under attack, here is a letter asking for help. Everyone's heart sank. So he went to the country of Xian. Gongxi Zhao and the others brought the scroll over and flipped it open with a hint of heaviness. However, when he read through it, his expression shook and he said, everyone, the country of Xian still exists. The enemy has already attacked for 2 consecutive days, but they are still blocked outside by the formation. The Grand Palace Master of Guyu Country, Jiang Zhu, said in shock, Langxian country can't stop them. The country of Xian is weak, and there is no great xianxue in the country. How can they stop them? Many people were also puzzled. Yuan Zai thought for a while and said hesitantly, could it be because the country of Xian chose to use spiritual vigor to form a formation? Everyone thought and their expressions instantly became complicated. When the cultivators of the 9 states came to the East Baron to build the Prohibition Formation, they gave the countries 2 choices. The power to activate the formation could be qi and blood, or it could be spiritual vigor. They could only choose one of the 2. Qi and blood could be activated by xianxue, while spiritual vigor could be collected by the formation from heaven and earth. Moreover, it needed at least a dozen cultivators who knew a little about formation to look after it. Almost most of the vassal states chose the power of qi and blood without hesitation. This was because they themselves were proficient in this. The formation could be closed or closed by themselves, and they might even be able to peek into the mystery of the formation. This choice was actually understandable. Things that concern the safety of a country should always be in their own hands. However, the Xian kingdom did not have any strong mystic cultivators, and the population of the kingdom was sparse, so they were not afraid of the greed of the cultivators of the 9 continents. They decided to use the spiritual opportunity to activate the formation, and treated the 10 cultivators as distinguished guests. Unexpectedly, this choice saved the people of the kingdom today. The great xianxue of Fuxiang, Tenguan, sighed and said, no wonder there was no movement after he entered the Cloud Plains. It turns out that in these 3 days, he was pinned down at the walls of the Xian kingdom. Mo Du raised his head and asked, Gong Yu Ji, did the letter state the identity of the enemy? Gong Kunzeo's expression was solemn as he said, "It's the Sky Ghost." Sky Ghost? Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. The power of the heavenly ghost tribe in the western desolate domain was extremely powerful. Even when the eastern wasteland divine kingdom dominated the eastern wasteland and the high priest eunuch Tuo was still around, they could only maintain a defensive stance. In comparison, they would rather go against the 100 South Civ continent. Mo Du pondered and said, "The heavenly ghost tribe and the cultivators of the 9 continents have fought for dozens of years, and I heard that they were always at a disadvantage. This time, it seems likely that they want to seek an opportunity to break through from the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland." Everyone's expression turned ugly. It was obvious that the heavenly ghost tribe could not defeat the sects of the 9 continents, so they turned to the weaker side to attack. Juyu asked, "How many great sages did the heavenly ghost tribe send this time?" Gong Xuanzhao said in a low voice, "Just from the letter alone, there are no less than 30 who showed up to attack the palace. Perhaps there are even more who are hiding." Everyone frowned even more. With so many great sages from the heavenly ghost tribe, it was no wonder they dared to be so arrogant, not even guarding their retreat route. Before the cultivators of the 9 continents arrived, there were only about 30 great xianxue of the 100 countries. Although there was an increase now, there were only about half 100. It was a little difficult to fight against them. Juyu looked at Mo Du, then at Gong Xuanzhao, and asked, "Should we ask for help from the northern heaven's cold abyss?" Mo Du did not make a sound. Gong Xuanzhao, however, shook his head and said, "The cultivators of the 9 continents seek an alliance, not a burden. It is not appropriate for us to ask for help when we encounter danger. Besides, the countries of the eastern wasteland are no longer what they used to be. We might be able to fight against the heavenly ghost that has returned." When he said this, all the mystic cultivators nodded. Although the cultivators of the 9 continents were much stronger than the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland, on the surface, the two sides still treated each other as equals. Moreover, the 9 continents also followed the rules. They would never take what they needed for free, and would always exchange for something of similar value. As the stronger side, they gave the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland enough respect. They should return the favor, at least not letting down their identity as an alliance. Yuan Zai agreed with this view very much. He said loudly, "That's right. The cultivators of the 9 continents can help me solve my problem once, but will they help me every time? I think we won't ask for help this time, and we can use the strength of the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland to repel the enemy." The great xianxue of Jie, Nanning, was more experienced. He said, "It is better to inform the northern heaven's cold abyss about this." Gongshi Zhao said, "Of course." Everyone knew that the matter was urgent and could not be delayed. After the decision was made, they quickly gathered people. In just 3 days, they gathered 300,000 mystic cultivators. Under the leadership of 25 great xianxue, they boarded the flying ships and went to the Exian nation to help. The Sky Ghost also noticed the actions of the countries of the eastern wasteland. They were prepared to retreat from the Exian nation and attack elsewhere while the 100 countries were empty. However, they did not expect the flying ships to be so fast that they caught up with them within a day. They followed closely behind them and could not shake them off no matter what. The leader of the Sky Ghost, Lian Xiao, observed carefully for a few days. He realized that the number of great xianxue was less than theirs, and they did not set up any traps. After careful consideration, he ordered, "Everyone, listen up. Follow me back to fight." He looked at the 100 flying ships in midair with bright eyes. He did not know why the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland would make such a foolish move, daring to fight them head-on with such a small number of people. However, if they could win this battle, the remaining strength of the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland would not be a concern. Chapter 13:18. Although the 30-odd demon saints of the heavenly ghost tribe came from different tribes, none of them hesitated after hearing Lian Zhao's order. They immediately stopped and turned back to fight. Ever since the East Barren territory lost its 3 great priests, the kingdoms of the human path had retreated to the cloud plain, surrounded by many demon and alien tribes. For thousands of years, they could only barely protect themselves, and could not do much. On the other hand, the Heavenly Ghost tribe ruled the western region. There were more than 200 great sages in the tribe, and there were also many demon sages under their rule. Before the arrival of the cultivators of the 9 continents, there was no force that could match them. The gap between the two was really too big, and the number of grand mystic cultivators from Eastern Wilderness who came to battle this time was not even as many as his opponent. Therefore, everyone on the Heavenly Ghost's side was full of confidence and thought that they would definitely win this battle easily. On the side of the 100 nations of the Eastern Wilderness, everyone was solemn. Most of them were prepared to die in battle. The Heavenly Ghost tribe was tricky and more difficult to deal with than destroying the Ming clan. If they had a choice, they would rather gather more people before fighting with their opponents. However, time was of the essence. These 20-odd people were the most they could bring out in a short time. If the Heavenly Ghosts were allowed to rampage in the hinterland of the Cloud Plain, the nations of the Eastern Wilderness would definitely suffer greater losses, and even the foundation of their rule would be shaken. Now, with the help of the cultivators of the 9 continents, the nations had just regained some momentum. They would not allow their enemies to destroy or obstruct them. Seeing that the Heavenly Ghost tribe had stopped in front of them and was not driven out of the Cloud Plain as they had hoped, Gongxian Zhao knew that this battle was inevitable. He immediately raised his hand and said, "Raise the flag." Upon receiving his order, 2 warriors with great strength raised their hammers high and beat them at the flag placed on the bow of the ship. With a loud bang, a dozen blood and chi flags rushed into the sky and fluttered in the air. They were as fierce as fire and fluttered above the 100 flying ships. At the same time, a cruel, unyielding, and incomparably domineering aura spread out. Hundreds of thousands of mystic warriors looked up and saw the 10 national banners that the divine kingdom of the Eastern Wilderness had forged after conquering demons, and demons in the past had reappeared in the world. All of a sudden, their blood began to boil, and they could not help but shout in unison. Rays of chi and blood chi radiated from their bodies, stirring up the spiritual vigor between heaven and earth. Then, they each activated their flying ships. He fearlessly charged forward to meet his opponent. In the plains of Xian country, the king, Yu Shao, stood at the top of the palace and looked into the distance. His eyes were filled with anxiety as hundreds of flying boats came to his aid. After chasing the Heavenly Ghosts for half a day, there were clouds of blood floating in the south. Even in the night, the sky was dyed red. He knew that the great mystic cultivators had already fought with those Heavenly Ghosts. Yesterday, the brilliance finally dissipated. He knew in his heart that the outcome of this battle had already been decided, but he did not know what the outcome would be. The last time the Heavenly Ghost had attacked, the Xian kingdom had barely managed to withstand it, but if Gongxi Zhao's side was defeated, and this generation came to invade again, then they would be powerless to resist. He felt that it wasn't a good idea to keep waiting like this, so he instructed one of his personal attendants, "You stay here and keep watch. If anything happens, come and report to me immediately." Then, he hurriedly returned to the pavilion, where there was a Taoist sitting cross-legged on a 30 feet long and wide jade platform. Rays of spiritual light flew from all directions and gathered into the formation plate beneath his feet. Not far from him, there was a cultivator who seemed to be protecting him. Yu Shao walked to the cultivator's side and asked, "Master Gao, when can this formation be activated again?" Taoist Gao said, "Don't worry, King Yu. The formation is not damaged at all. In another 2 days, it will be restored to its original state." Yu Shao, however, was anxious and said, "The situation is not good. The outcome of the battle should have been decided, but there is still no one coming back. If the Heavenly Ghosts won, they will probably be able to return here in a day. Can you hurry up, Master?" Master Gao shook his head and said, "That can't be rushed. However, King Yu, you don't have to worry too much. Your Xian kingdom is blessed by the heavens, and there is the protection of the mystical wind screen outside your kingdom. Together with the formation that we have set up, we can at least hold them back for a day. By then, the formation will be completely repaired." Hearing this, Yu Shao felt slightly relieved. Master Gao looked at him and said, "However, I advise King Yu to make plans as soon as possible. If those fellow Taoists can't win, it will be difficult to defend this place. Retreating is the best option. Yu Shao shook his head and said with a resolute expression, as the king, I will live and die with the country. Then, he cupped his hands apologetically and said, I'm sorry to have implicated you. Seeing that he didn't seem to be lying, Master Gao felt a bit of admiration. After pondering for a moment, he said, I won't hide it from King Yu. Those heavenly ghosts aren't very fast. We have magic tools given to us by our sects, so if we want to leave, they might not be able to catch up. If King Yu doesn't want to leave, why don't you let us take away any important people? Yu Zhao's eyes lit up. He thought for a moment and his expression became serious. He cupped his hands and said, if that moment really comes, can I ask you to take the young master away? Master Gao said, that's not impossible. At this moment, the Daoist in the formation seemed to have exhausted his magic power. He walked out without saying a word and nodded at Master Gao before sitting outside the formation plate to adjust his breathing. Master Gao cupped his hands at Yu Shao and took over. Yu Shao thought for a moment and walked out. Before he went out, the servant just now ran in hurriedly, his face full of excitement. He said, King Yu, the Grand Palace Masters are back. What? Yu Shao couldn't believe it. He couldn't care less about the majesty of the king and walked out quickly. At this moment, the sun had just risen. In the morning light, flying ships could be seen coming from the horizon. The people standing on the ships were obviously the mystic cultivators of Eastern Baron. He was also excited. He raised his hands and shouted, God bless the people of our Exine kingdom. The battle between the heavenly ghosts and the 100 nations of Eastern Baron lasted for 2 whole days. However, the result of this battle was beyond the expectations of both sides. The heavenly ghosts suffered a great defeat. 7 great saints died in the battle, while the 100 nations of Eastern Baron only paid the price of 2 great mystic cultivators dead and 1 seriously injured. Even the mystic cultivators of the Eastern Baron countries couldn't believe it. Before this, they thought that even if they could win this battle, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. It would be good enough if they could drive the enemy out. They didn't expect that they could achieve such a great result. After this battle, the heavenly ghosts were driven out of the cloud plains. The 100 nations of Eastern Baron originally wanted to expand their victory, but Lian Shao didn't give them the chance. He stayed behind and ordered the saints under his command to scatter and escape. The mystic cultivators of Eastern Baron needed to work together to unleash their power against the enemy. Moreover, they couldn't be sure if the heavenly ghosts had other reinforcements. After severely injuring Lian Shao, they could only give up and return. After Lian Shao returned to the heavenly ghosts' encampment a few days later, he dove into his tent and fell into a deep sleep. Fortunately, his body was strong. In just one night, he walked out unscathed. An elder of Suijian came up and asked in a low voice, what exactly happened? Lian Shao sighed. I was careless. After explaining in detail, Elder Suijian finally understood the reason for their defeat. The heavenly ghosts originally had the ability to turn into nothingness and shapelessness. With this supernatural power, they could gain the upper hand when fighting against any demons or alien species. However, this time, the 100 nations of Eastern Baron actually had a way to counter it, causing them to suffer a huge loss at the start. Not only that, almost all the great mystic cultivators in Eastern Baron had a mystic treasure with extraordinary power. Once they fought, many were either fixed on the spot or moved out of the battle circle. Although it was only a few breaths' time, it was enough to change the outcome of the battle. The heavenly ghosts seemed to have more people than the other side, but under the restriction of the mystic treasures, they were actually fighting for themselves. How could they not lose? Elder Suijian said in a low voice, His Majesty originally hoped for a great victory. We lost so many people. If His Majesty blames us, we won't be able to bear the consequences. Lian Zhao's expression turned cold. He said, this matter can't be reported. We also need to restrain our subordinates from speaking carelessly. Elder Suijian looked at him and said, even if Elder Lien doesn't say it, His Majesty has a way to find out. Lien Shao snorted and said, I'm not afraid of His Majesty finding out. I'm just afraid of those tribal elders finding out. Elder Suijian was shocked. He nodded and said, but we can't hide it for long. What are our preparations? Lien Shao said with a gloomy face, if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't bring the World Reflection Tower this time, Eastern Baron wouldn't have been able to take advantage of us. I want to bring people to attack again. If we succeed, we can cover up this matter. Elder Suijian Daoren said, when are we going to do it? Lien Shao did not lose his mind. He said, the tribesmen are also tired after this battle. We will rest for 5 days before attacking Eastern Baron. 3 days later, he had already returned to Zhang Yan's floating celestial palace. He also received the news about the battle. He was not surprised that Eastern Baron could win against the heavenly ghosts. Instead, he felt that it was reasonable. In the past few decades, the cultivators of the 9 continents had built great arrays and refined magical treasures for the 100 countries of the Eastern Wasteland, all so that they could stand on their own and block the invasion from the south. Now, they had finally seen the results. However, after the defeat of the heavenly ghosts, they could either retreat or invest more forces. Zhang Yan thought about it and felt that the latter was more likely. After all, there were only a few mystic cultivators in the 100 countries of Eastern Baron. The death of any one of them was a loss. If the 100 states of South Civ also joined in, it would be even more difficult to resist. Although they did not ask for help, the 9 states could not just sit and watch. After thinking for a long time, he released his divine will into a void. Almost in an instant, the figures of sect masters Qin and Yu also appeared. He bowed and greeted the 2 sect masters. Sect Master Qin said, Hall Master Duzhen's divine will is here. Is there any change on the land? Zhang Yan said, there is indeed something important. He told them about the attack on Eastern Baron and said, this time, the tribes of the heavenly ghosts attacked Eastern Baron because they saw that our defense of the 9 states was stable and couldn't find any loopholes. Yu Xianshao said, can Eastern Baron be defended? Zhang Yan said, although the 100 countries of Eastern Baron won a small victory, they won't be able to defend for long against the joint attack of the 100 states of South Civ and the heavenly ghosts. If they are defeated, the South will lose its defense and will likely be attacked from both sides. However, if I reach out to help, I will only be led away by the heavenly ghosts. I don't think this is a good plan. Sect Master Qin smiled and said, Hall Master Duzhen, what do you think? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered and he said, this time, the heavenly ghosts attacked Eastern Baron and mobilized many people. Although the Western Desolate Domain is not empty, it is definitely not as strong as before. Why don't we take this opportunity to attack first? Chapter 13:19. However, after a few days, Lien Shao gathered all his men and fought back. The Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom and demons had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They did not let down their guard just because of one victory. Instead, they set up the qi and blood pattern in the Lang Xiangua and guarded the southern gate of the Yunyuan South. If it was somewhere else, the heavenly ghost could fly through the void and go around the gate. However, there was a golden Xian gale above the Yunyuan plain. Those who did not understand the mystery would only be sucked into it if they tried to barge in. Therefore, they had to fight again in the ruins of the Lang Xiangua. This time, all the saints of the heavenly ghost tribe brought the world Jian Pagoda. Even though it was still difficult to resist the power of the magic treasure, the defense ability was greatly increased. Instead, the Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom suffered a little loss. However, the countries of the Eastern Wasteland Divine Kingdom were different from the past. They still defended this place firmly. Lien Shao led his men to attack for more than 10 days, but still could not break through the gate. As more and more great mystic cultivators rushed to the south of the Yunyuan plain, the advantage of the heavenly ghost was gradually reduced. To reverse the situation, Lien Shao asked for help from the heavenly ghost's ancestral tribe. At the same time, he took out a large number of blood stones and sent messengers to visit the demon saints of the 100 states of South Sea. This trick worked. Several demon saints were persuaded by the messengers to come to help. In the next half a month, the two sides fought fiercely several times. There were victories and defeats on both sides. After receiving the news, Zhang Yan was very clear that although the situation in the south looked stable on the surface, there was actually a great danger lurking inside. Now, there were 40 great mystic cultivators and 600,000 mystic cultivators in the Langxiangua kingdom. This could be considered a war that could topple a country. If they continued to fight like this, the heavenly ghost and the 100 states of South Sea would exhaust all their forces and die there. Although the 100 nations had yet to ask for help, as an ally, even if he didn't consider the situation from the perspective of the alliance, he couldn't turn a blind eye to it. He said, "How many demonic saints have joined our Dark Azure sect?" Jing Yu replied, "Master, up until last month. A total of 18 have come to us." Zhang Yan said, "Go and pass my order. Take Yan Yi and Tian Kun to lead these 18 demons to the eastern wasteland for help." Jing Yu obeyed and left. Zhang Yan looked at the sky. He had already come to an agreement with the two sect masters, Qin and Yu. Once he returned from the void sky, he would gather everyone to attack the western desolate region. However, the two of them had already reached the depths of the void and immediately set off. It would take another 7 to 8 days before they could return to the mountain sea land. Before that, he still had many things to prepare. After Jing Yu returned, he instructed, "Go and summon Baoyang Courtyard's headmaster Chu." Because many forbidden arrays had been built in the past few decades, Chu Gongtan arrived in front of the Duzhen Hall in just a few dozen breaths. He stepped into the hall and said, "Greetings, Hall Master Duzhen." Zhang Yan raised his sleeve and said, "Dean Chu, you don't have to be so courteous. I want to ask, how much of the muddy tranquil water is there now?" 10 years ago, this serene water had already been refined. However, there wasn't much of it, just a pot. At that time, he already felt that the battle with Heavenly Ghost might be brought forward, so he instructed Baoyang Courtyard to speed up the refinement. Chu Gongtan replied, "There are already 100 ponds." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "It's still a little too little, barely enough." Chu Gongtan smiled bitterly and said, "After receiving Hall Master Duzhen's order, the disciples in the courtyard did their best and didn't refine other treasures. It took dozens of years to refine this much. There really isn't much more." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I know you all have tried your best. Refining serene water was not easy. Firstly, it was limited by the precious materials, and secondly, it involved Chen clan's secret techniques. They couldn't use the disciples outside the sect, so they could only rely on the disciples in the courtyard to do it. It was indeed not easy to have so much now." He continued, "After returning, continue to refine this water. Those are already refined. Send them to the floating heavenly palace immediately, and I will remember Dean Chu's merit for this." Chu Gongtan was delighted. Only meritorious deeds could be exchanged for better secret techniques. Although he had cut off his Tao insight, the disciples in the clan needed these, so he immediately bowed and said, "Thank you, Hall Master Duzhen." Seeing that there was no more sound coming from the seat, he also knew that it was time for him to leave, so he bowed again and left. Zhang Yan stood up and waved his sleeve. A spiritual light flashed in front of him, and a formation door appeared. He stepped through it and appeared in a pill room in the next moment. There was a cultivator guarding this place, and he was shocked to see him come out. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Disciple greets Master Zhang." Zhang Yan asked indifferently, "Is Dean Huang here?" The cultivator hurriedly said, Yes, he's refining a Dharma carriage at the back of the mountain." Zhang Yan's divine sense swept across, and he stepped through the void and arrived at the back of the mountain. This was a basin surrounded by mountains on all sides. Inside, magma overflowed, and the blazing light was thick. It was also an earthly fire heavenly furnace, and above the heavenly furnace, there was a huge palace floating in midair. At this moment, there were thousands of cultivators holding banners and riding on flying ships. They were flying around the palace, and their hands did not stop as they continuously launched spells one after another. They seemed to be very busy. A Taoist with a resolute face was standing at the highest point, supervising the actions of the cultivators, and occasionally issuing orders. At this moment, he also seemed to have noticed something. He turned around and saw that it was Zhang Yan, and his expression was shocked. He immediately put down what he was doing and came over on the conveyance light. When he landed, he respectfully bowed and said, "I didn't know that Master Zhang would be here. Please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier." This was the Fengsuan courtyard's Huang Qianni, Fan Chengqing's disciple, and could be considered as Meng Zhen's grand disciple. The previous Dean Su had already reincarnated long ago. Zhang Yan said, "It's fine." He looked up and asked, "How is the construction of this palace going, Dean Huang?" Huang Qianni said seriously, "It's more or less complete, but I haven't passed through the chaotic magnetic chasm, so I can't guarantee that it's safe." This palace was called the Heavenspan Capital's Imperial Palace City. Under Zhang Yan's orders, the Baoyang courtyard had spent decades and countless precious materials in the mountain and sea realm to build this magical carriage. The Qinsang school had never lacked magical treasures for movement, and the purpose of building this carriage was not only to allow cultivators to fly, but also to travel to certain special places. The Heavenly Ghost Tribe's heavenly palace was located on Shocking Sky Mountain, which was surrounded by the chaotic magnetic force. Even demon saints would find it difficult to fly there, and would need the help of Xiong Jin to smoothly travel there. However, this item was very rare, and could only be found on this mountain. Furthermore, it was firmly in the hands of the Heavenly Palace's ancestral division. Even the Heavenly Ghost Tribe's patriarchs rarely had it. Sima Quan knew how powerful it was, so he had sent a piece over. After the Fengsuan courtyard received it, they sent their disciples to gather foreign materials. After 40 years, they had refined a similar item called heavy rain copper, and had refined it into this palace city. Zhang Yan replied, "The reason why I'm here today is to bring this item to the chaotic magnetic lands of the heavens moat to test its usefulness. I just want to ask Headmaster Huang, since the refinement is stable, what are you doing now?" Huang Qianni hurriedly said, "Originally, it was still lacking some restraints to resist the metal, wind, and fire of the outer world, so that it would be convenient to travel in the void. However, a few disciples came back from the eastern wasteland and found that the blood and qi patterns seemed to be able to resist the qi of the outer world more easily. At that time, they would only need to capture a few demon saints, and they would be able to control it. Thus, they tried to refine it. However, after it was completed, there was a flaw. Once the blood and qi was released, it was extremely difficult to conceal. It was very likely that it would be discovered by the enemy from a very far distance, so now, a layer of restraints was added on the outside to conceal this power." Zhang Yan nodded and asked again, "How many more days do you need to complete it?" Huang Qianni said, "If Zhenren needs it urgently, I can transfer another 1,000 disciples over, and it will only take 2 days to complete it." Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then said, "I'll give you 3 days." He leaped up into the air, transformed into a beam of clear light, and flew into the palace city. There were pavilions scattered all over the place, beautiful rivers and beautiful mountains, dangerous creeks and waterfalls, and among the peaks of the mountains, temples, and pavilions could be seen indistinctly. He only glanced at them for a moment, then walked straight into the main hall. There was a dragon sparrow bright sun lantern hanging high up in the air. The ground was inlaid with golden pearls, and the pillars were suspended in the air. In the middle of the hall, there was a green pond. He looked down and nodded, saying, "Quite diligent." With a flick of his finger, there was a sound of thunder, and a light drizzle fell from the sky. It was not ordinary rainwater, but was filled with spiritual vigor, and could be easily refined by cultivators. For ordinary cultivators to cultivate here, 1 day of cultivation would be equivalent to 10 days of cultivation. This water was drawn purely by the power of the array, which could only be done in the mountain and sea realm. If it were still in the 9 continents, just the spiritual vigor of the array would not be enough. A Dharma carriage like this, even in the hands of the Taoist paradise, could be considered a treasure. But for mortal metamorphosis cultivators, it could only be used to travel through the void. He flicked his sleeve, stepped across the water, and sat down on the jade throne, then closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. 2 days later, there was a flash of light outside the hall, and Huang Qianyi flew in. He clasped his hands and said, "Daoist, the restrictive spell has been set up." Zhang Yan opened his eyes and said, "Got it. Court Master Huang, you can leave first." After Huang Qianyi left, he circulated his magic power, and lightning flickered all over his body. There was a tremor, and with a rumble, the palace city disappeared. He had sent it into the heavenly paradise. He rode a cloud out of the Fengsuan courtyard, and after getting his bearings, he stepped into the void. After a few teleportations, he arrived at the southern end of the northern cold abyss, in front of the chaotic space chasm. Lightning flickered on his body, and the palace city was released again. Then, he stood in it and drove it slowly into the chasm. After traveling for a few kilometers, he felt the speed of the palace city suddenly slow down, as if it had suddenly become several times heavier. But it was still floating steadily in the sky, and did not fall. He had been traveling for a day, and apart from using up a lot of spiritual vigor, there was nothing unusual. He nodded in his heart, and thought to himself, there should be no more obstacles on my way to Shocking Sky Mountain. In fact, as long as he could break the million-world mirror tower outside of the Heavenly King's city, whether it was sect masters Qin or Yu, or himself, they could destroy this place with a flip of their palms. But Shocking Sky Mountain was unique, and Shaoqing saw it as the future location of the sect, so he could not use such a violent method. He had to use ingenious methods. After he drove the palace city out of the chasm, he waved his sleeve and put it back into the heavenly paradise. Then, he broke through the void and returned to the Palace of Crossing Truth, where he sat on a prayer mat and waited for the 2 sect masters to return. Chapter 13:20. 2 more days passed. Outside the barrier of the mountain and sea realm, spiritual light flickered, as if thunder and lightning were roaming about. The rumbling shook the heavens. One Can's book Hu Cc Zhang Yan awoke from his meditation and looked up. He saw 2 beams of light descending toward the frigid Jade Sea Prefecture. He knew that the 2 sect leaders had returned from the void. He muttered to himself for a moment, then said to Jingyu, "Send word to the Qinsang school. Invite the spiritual masters of the various sects to discuss matters." Jingyu bowed, then went out to deliver the order. Not long after, beams of light flew out from the floating heavenly palace and headed toward the various sects' headquarters. One of them headed straight for the southwest abyss. Yuan Hongyang was sitting on an altar in the royal city of the Shanyang clan, cultivating. The yellow mist river surged around him. All of a sudden, he sensed something strange. He used his magic power to open the portal and reached inside. A beam of spiritual light appeared in his palm. He sensed it and immediately knew what it was. After a moment's thought, he pointed at the psychic jade wall in front of him. Soon, the jade wall began to vibrate, and light began to shine. One by one, figures appeared. They were the spiritual masters of the various sects of the Spirit Sect. "Greetings, Spiritual Master Yuan." Yuan Hongyang returned the greeting, then said, "Just now, a letter from the frigid Jade Sea Prefecture has arrived, inviting us to discuss matters." Spiritual Master Wei said, "Is it about the Sky Demon Punitive Expedition?" Yuan Hongyang nodded. Spiritual Master Zhang mentioned before that he might want to attack the Sky Demon Punitive Expedition first. "The time has come, so he sent a letter to summon me." Hibiko Higashi said, "In that case, we should leave as soon as possible." Yuan Hongyang said, "It's just that after we leave, there will be no one left to guard the sect. It wouldn't be appropriate to leave the disciples here." Shui Dingyuan also said, "That's right. Just now, the spirit sect has recovered some of its vitality. We can't afford to suffer any more damage." During the mortal tribulation, many of the spirituality sect's disciples had been killed or injured. Most of those who had perished had been the elite disciples of the sect. Those who had survived were not particularly outstanding, and thus arrived in the mountain and sea realm. After dozens of years of nurturing, there was a slight improvement. However, it would still take at least a few hundred years for it to recover its vitality. Another one was that the earth abyss was bottomless. No one knew what was hidden underneath. Once Xu Zhen left, there was no one to watch over him. Even though there was a great formation protecting him, it was better to be safe than sorry. No matter what, they had to be prepared in advance. When Qingxiang suggested, except for those who stay behind to guard the formation, the rest of the disciples can be sent into the cave and come out after the battle. Xue Dingyuan said, this is also safe. The heavenly ghost did not cultivate spiritual vigor, so it did not have anything that could destroy the grotto heaven. Hence, it was safe to place its disciples inside. Yuan Hongyang said, in that case, perfected ones can go back and settle down. Once the matter is over, we can meet under the turbidine barrier and go to the frigid Jade Ocean province together. The spiritual sect's spiritual masters bowed in the jade disk and dispersed. Their movements were extremely fast and they did not delay in the slightest. In just half a day, except for a few cultivators who stayed behind to guard the formation, most of the disciples were sent into the cave. Other than the spiritual sect's cultivators, there were also the Shanyang clan survivors in the earth abyss. The spiritual sect's actions naturally caused them to be shocked. Many of them were still secretly guessing if the heavenly ghost's ancestral division was attacking. These cultivators from beyond the heavens wanted to escape, and some of them were even tempted to make a move. However, over the years, those who held power in the Shanyang clan were mostly loyal to the spiritual sect. Many of them had already joined the sect. Moreover, with the deterrence of the formation inside and outside, these people could only think about it and did not dare to make any rash moves. After the spiritual sect's spiritual masters dealt with the matters in the sect, they brought their sect's treasures with them. They arrived under the turbidine barrier. Clouds and mist lingered here, and there were already 5 cloud whales waiting here. Yuan Hongyang was standing on a cloud whale. He nodded at the spiritual masters and said, if there is nothing else, perfected ones, we will depart now. The spiritual sect's spiritual masters turned into spiritual lights and flew out, and each of them stood on a big whale. After a short while, a cloud of smoke rose in front of them, blocking their sight. After a few breaths, the clouds slowly dissipated. In front of them was a vast ocean, and there were continents and stars all over it. In the sky, there were floating peaks and flying islands everywhere. They were already outside the cold Jade Ocean province. At this moment, they heard a long sound coming from above. The 5 looked up and saw the clouds and mist in the sky dissipate layer by layer. Their vision became clear, and gradually, a huge palace appeared. Hibiko Higashi was surprised, where is that? I have never seen it before. When Qingxiang thought quickly and said, maybe it is to attack the object made by the heavenly ghost. Yuan Hongyang said, no need to ask more. We will know when we get there. Everyone flew up into the sky and arrived above the palace in a flash. There were 2 big watchtowers standing on the left and right, and behind them was a magnificent temple with big pillars and wide eaves, high platforms, and long steps. Although it was generally in the shape of the 9 continents, there were some Eastern barren styles mixed in. Hibiko Higashi caught a wisp of chi and said, it is indeed a newly made object, and there is still a trace of the power of the chi and blood pattern. Yuan Hongyang looked at the jade steps in front of him and went first. The others followed. The group walked up the steps, and after a while, they arrived in front of the temple. When the Taoists on duty saw the Taoist grotto heaven perfected ones coming, they all lowered their heads and bowed. There were also hundreds of strong men in front, pushing the door open with force. When they stepped into the temple, they saw that there were already several grotto heaven perfected ones here. They were all dressed in the Pingde sect's uniform. The one in the lead was the Pingde sect master, Qi Hengchan. They walked up and greeted him. Yuan Hongyang looked at a cultivator in his 30s beside Wu Wei. He had never seen him before, and he asked, how should I address you, perfected one? The cultivator came up and saluted, I am Lan Yanchu. Greetings to the perfected ones of the Ling sect. The perfected ones of the Ling sect did not dare to say anything and returned the salute. Wu Wei said, Yanchu is my disciple. 3 years ago, he entered the state of Xiang by luck. The disciples of the Pingdu sect were well versed in Tao techniques, and their Dharma spirits complemented each other. However, due to the limited number of seats in the hidden appearance pagoda, no matter what level the disciple cultivated to, as long as the person in front did not give up his seat, he would not be able to take a step forward. After the spiritual pearl was retrieved from the pagoda, there were 3 more seats. This meant that in the Pingdu sect, there could be at most 6 grotto heaven perfected ones. Lan Yanchu was the first disciple to sit in this seat. After the 2 sides exchanged greetings, the perfected ones of the Ling sect entered their seats. Hibiko Higashi said, "Other than the Pingdu sect, it seems that there is another disciple from the Huanjin temple who has entered the grotto heaven." Wen Qingxiang said, "I have also heard about this. Rumor has it that the disciple is a relative of perfected Zhang, and he is the most outstanding disciple of the next generation in the Huanjin temple. With perfected Zhang's help, it is not surprising that he could achieve something." The Ling sect and the Huanjin temple had been fighting for tens of thousands of years. Although they had put aside their past grievances, they still paid attention to each other's movements. Perfected Wei said faintly, "There is a lot of spiritual opportunity in the mountain and sea realm, and there is also a lot of external medicine. However, the disciples of the Ling sect have suffered too much damage. It will take at least hundreds of years for another disciple to enter this state." Shui Dingyuan said, "Whether it is hundreds of years or thousands of years, as long as the Ling sect maintains the current situation, we will be able to recover sooner or later." The bells in Suigong City rang one after another. After half a day, the perfected ones of the various sects arrived. What attracted the most attention was that on the side of the Qinsang school, there were 4 more enlightened masters in the seats than usual. As for the Shaoqing sect, which also had mortal metamorphosis cultivators, there was not a single disciple who entered this state. This was because it was not easy to cultivate a sword, and there were some who clearly had reached the required level to cultivate a sword pill, but because they felt that they could not cultivate the true spirit in the sword, they would rather continue to cultivate and polish than take this step. The only pity was that the sect leader of Li Mountain sect, Shen Zixin, was not able to fulfill Jinren Yuling's last wish because her foundation was lacking. Decades ago, because she felt that she no longer had a chance, she passed the position of sect leader to a disciple of the sect and reincarnated. After all, the Li Mountain sect had an ascended cultivator like perfected Yuling, so the other sects still regarded it as a great Xianmen sect. However, this legacy would gradually fade with the passing of time. Within 1,000 years, if this lineage could not leave the grotto heaven, then it would no longer be qualified to be called the same as the other sections. Soon, the day passed, and the sky was already dark. The dragon sparrow bright lamp on the roof of the hall shone brightly, and there was also a strange fragrance coming out of the cauldron. Green smoke curled up, and the qi was dense. When everyone was waiting, they suddenly felt the spiritual vigor in their bodies moving. They opened their eyes and saw that at the highest jade platform, there were 3 rays of clear light. After a while, the light dispersed, and Qin Mabai, Yu Xianshao, and Zhang Yan walked out and stood on the jade platform. As soon as the 3 of them appeared, the majestic qi that they inadvertently emitted caused the entire palace to shake. Just now, it had calmed down. All the enlightened masters stood up and bowed to the platform from afar. Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Enlightened masters, please sit down and talk." Zhu Zhen thanked him and waited for the 3 of them to sit down before he sat down. Zhang Yan looked at sect leader Qin, and the latter nodded. He then turned around and said in a clear voice, "Today, I have gathered all the enlightened masters here for the matter of attacking the heavenly ghost." Everyone's hearts trembled. They had heard that the heavenly ghost had been ordered by a force from beyond the heavens to annihilate all the sections. They knew that there would be a battle between them, and they had started planning and preparing for it decades ago. However, they did not expect this day to come so soon. Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and a ray of spiritual light flew out. Smoke rose up from the hall and changed into the landscape of the mountain and sea realm. In the south of the eastern wasteland, there was a flash of red light, which was very eye-catching. He continued, "About 10 days ago, the heavenly ghost's ancestral tribe sent out dozens of great sages. They took a detour from the south and invaded the eastern wasteland. They are now in a stalemate in the Langxian nation, south of the Cloud Plains. The sects of the 9 continents are allies with the 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland, so we must help them. Going south to help them is a bad idea. The 100 nations of the Eastern Wasteland can't withstand our magic power and divine abilities. Therefore, after a discussion with the 2 sect leaders, I decided to go straight to the shocking sky mountain of the Heavenly Ghosts' ancestral tribe. We will only destroy the 9 tribes of the Heavenly Ghosts that are entrenched there. The remaining thousands of tribes will be like a plate of loose sand, and it will not be difficult to destroy them. Chapter 13:21. When the Taoist masters of the various sects heard that they were going straight for Jingqiong Mountain, they couldn't help but be surprised by this decision. The battle between the 2 sides was usually like a battle between 2 cultivators. They would first probe each other, and after roughly understanding each other's strength, they would then use their true methods. They originally thought that they would first attack the Western Heavens' absolute domain and set up the altar and restriction formation on the continent before slowly planning their next move. He did not expect that he would use his full strength right from the start. It was clear that he wanted to decide the outcome of the battle in one go. The mountain and sea realm was not like the 9 continents, where it was possible to travel between the 2 continents in a single day. Whether it was the frigid North Chasm or the Western Sky Badlands, they were vast areas that would take dozens or even hundreds of days to fly across. Furthermore, there were many blood-chi barriers along the way, making it difficult to launch a sneak attack. Shocking Sky Mountain was the ancestral base of the Heavenly Ghost. It was rumored that there were several ghost ancestors in the tribe, plus at least hundreds of great sages. Their real strength was not much inferior to the sects of the 9 continents. If this attack failed, it would be difficult for them to return safely. That was not all. If this trip failed, then the Eastern Wasteland would definitely not be able to resist, and the Northern Heaven Cold Abyss would be under pressure from 2 directions. Decades of hard work might be lost overnight. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I understand your concerns, but this attack on Tiangui's ancestral tribe was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It has long been prepared, so I would like to invite everyone to meet someone." He nodded to a Taoist child beside him. The latter raised his drum and gently struck the bell hanging at the side. In an instant, the sound traveled far out of the hall. Everyone felt a gust of cold wind blowing in from outside the hall, and then a middle-aged Taoist with a deep expression appeared in the main hall. His figure was erratic, like smoke and fog. He first cupped his hands towards Zhang Yan and the other 2 who were seated, then he cupped his hands towards both sides and said, "Greetings, Jinren." Sky Demon. Zhu Jin only needed to sense his aura to know who he was. Many people didn't show it on the surface, but they couldn't help but be vigilant in their hearts. Right now, the other party was only a clone. His true body was not here, so it would be useless even if he destroyed it. Someone swept a few glances at Huanjin Temple and the spiritual gate, but they didn't make any moves. He had already vaguely guessed something in his heart. Zhang Yan pointed at him and said, "This is Taoist Master Sima of the Netherspring sect. He has personally infiltrated the Western Desolate Domain under I's order for dozens of years to gather information about the Heavenly Ghosts. Now, I know everything about the Heavenly Ghosts. It can be said that I have a general understanding of the situation." At this point, he glanced around and said in a clear voice, "Everyone, you don't have to worry. Master Sima is not a demon who has lost his humanity. Although he was previously disturbed by the demonic will, the hidden danger in his body has long been resolved. Other than the difference in the cultivation method, he is actually no different from us." At this moment, Pu Xianxing stood up from his seat and said in a deep voice, "I was previously entrusted by Taoist Zhang. Using the secret method of Huanjin Temple to examine Taoist Master Sima's qi dynamic, this person can indeed be called a sky demon. But rather than saying that he is a sky demon, it is better to say that he has taken over the sky demon's body. Just like what Taoist Zhang said, there is nothing wrong with it. With 3 Taoist Fan 2 up there, and the head of Huanjin Temple personally coming out to testify on this matter, the people's wariness towards Sima Quan immediately decreased a lot. Their expressions also softened a little, but they still had their guard up. Zhang Yan didn't care about these things. As long as the people knew that this person could be used by their side, it was fine. He said again, Taoist Master Sima, come and tell the Taoists about the details of Jingxiong Mountain. Sima Quan replied, and he walked to the top of the mountain. After a few steps, he stopped in front of the Jingxiong Mountain. He raised his hand and pressed down. The place suddenly enlarged, almost reaching the height of a person. Just now, he stopped. He pointed and said, this is where the heavenly ghoul's ancestral Jingxiong Mountain is located. The people looked and saw that the mountain was like a sword piercing the sky. There were thousands of vines waving around it, and at the end of the vines, there were floating mountains and flying islands. It wasn't that it was still, but it seemed to be floating there slowly. Ran Shoshu's eyes lit up when she saw this. She clapped her hands and said, extraordinary creation, a divine land. Sect Master Taoist Master has chosen a good place. Many of the Taoists present couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This place was extraordinary and dangerous, comparable to the cold Jade Ocean continent. Sima Quan said in a deep voice, this Jingxiong Mountain has 3 layers of defense. The first layer is the chaotic magnetic force in the mountain that is similar to the natural mode of the 4 regions. The great saints of the heavenly ghoul race also need an artifact called Xiong Jin to pass through. A few Taoists couldn't help but think about how they should go over. Zhang Yan smiled and said, don't worry, everyone. The Skirich capital imperial palace under our feet was refined for the purpose of passing through this place. He nodded to Sima Quan, indicating that they should continue. The latter bowed slightly and waved his hand toward the Jingxiong Mountain. A blood veil rose from the plains outside the mountain and enveloped the entire mountain. He said, the second layer of defense is a blood and chi barrier created by several demon forefathers of the heavenly ghoul race. Those who aren't from the heavenly ghoul race will find it difficult to approach. In the mountain and sea realm, this kind of defense can only be broken by people with similar cultivation. However, these ghost forefathers are from the same race, so the defense is even stronger. Yu Xianshao said calmly, there's no need to say anything else. When the time comes, I will cut it open with my sword. Sima Quan nodded and raised his hand to pat the Jingxiong Mountain. Before long, a dense number of small dots jumped out and surrounded the mountain. As for the third layer, it is the most precious defensive treasure of the Heavenly King City. It is called the World Reflector Pagoda, and there are millions of them. It is not something that heavenly ghouls can refine. It was passed down by a power from beyond the heavens. It is comparable to our 9 continents' great protective formation. It is the biggest obstacle in our way. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and made a grabbing motion. A stream of water vapor appeared out of thin air. He opened his palm and saw a deep stream of water vapor swirling in his palm. This is murky serene water. Any treasure of the 5 elements will be dissolved once it comes into contact with it. It can be used to break the World Reflector Pagoda. Sima Quan cupped his hands and said, so Taoist already has a way to break it. I was thinking too much. Qi Hongchan said from his seat, are the heavenly ghouls' ancestors not here? Sima Quan replied, the ancestors of the heavenly ghouls are sleeping in the wilderness outside the Jingxiong Mountain. They are not in this mountain. They can only be awakened by a blood sacrifice. However, if someone with similar cultivation breaks through their blood chi barrier, they may be alarmed. Sect leader Qin said slowly, Sect leader Yu, and Hall Master Du Zhen will deal with those heavenly ghouls' ancestors together. Taoists, you don't have to worry about them. Sima Quan looked around and said, I have been hiding in the Heavenly King City for dozens of years. Although I have heard a lot of secrets, the heavenly ghouls have been operating here for a long time. I can't guarantee that I have seen through all the secrets. There may be some powerful arrangements that I haven't discovered. Fortunately, this shouldn't be able to stop the Taoists here. I just want to remind you that the hundreds of millions of people in King's City are the most elite of the heavenly ghouls. Even if the rest of the tribes are killed, the people here can still make a comeback. However, if they are exterminated, the rest of the tribes will no longer be a concern. At this point, he smiled deeply and stretched out his hand. With a light push, the Jingxiong mountain peak that was formed by the gathering of smoke, clouds, and dust immediately collapsed. The sound of the quake reverberated in the hall for a long time. Just now, it dissipated. At this moment, Zhang Yan's gaze fell and said, "We will set off for this place in a moment. Daoist Sima, please keep an eye on the movements here. If there are any changes, report to me immediately." Sima Quan cupped his hands and bowed to the seat. His body slowly dissipated and disappeared. Zhang Yan turned his gaze to the seat of the spiritual gate and said, "Master Shui, this trip to the western desolate domain will take a long time. Let's make some illusions so that they will mistakenly think that we are still in the northern cold abyss." Sima Quan had previously reported to him that there was an informant hidden in the Blue Feather Pavilion. He believed that the informant was paying attention to their every move. It was a good time to make use of it and deceive the informant with illusions so that it would be easier to carry out their mission. Shui Dingyuan stood up and bowed. He said, "I will solemnly accept the decree." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said to the outside of the hall, "Bring it up." As soon as the door of the hall opened, more than 30 people walked up with jade plates. The items on the plates were covered with jade brocade. There were jade beads hanging at the four corners, obviously suppressing the spiritual vigor within. Zhang Yan waited for them to arrive before he waved his sleeves and removed the jade brocade. On each jade plate, there was a Dharma artifact that shone with a myriad of colors. He said in a clear voice, "Since occupying the cold Jade Ocean province, you have killed many demon saints. Those who offered up their qi and blood were mostly devoured by that ferocious creature. Their bodies were refined into these instruments. If Zenrins find them to your liking, please take them and refine them." Many of the Zenrins present were instantly interested. Although they did not lack in instruments, the instruments refined from the bodies of these demon saints had their own uniqueness. Moreover, with a great battle at hand, anything that could enhance one's strength was never too much. Immediately, a few of them reached out and took the instruments. They then placed them into their dharmakayas to refine them patiently. Zhang Yan knew that this would take at least a few hours. Moreover, he had to wait for Shui Dingyuan to finish the arrangements. They could only move when dawn arrived. Thus, he used his spirit to communicate with the divine beast Black Tortoise. After a while, a spiritual light rose from the cold Jade Ocean province and flew towards the south. There was still a demon ancestor in the 100 southern Luo continent. It must have colluded with the force from beyond the heavens. That day, when the demon sensed his arrival, it retreated. Because Lu Yenyi and Tian Kuan, the two disciples were present, and they were not clear about the details of the 100 southern Luo continent, they let it go. However, once they made a move under the shocking sky mountain, they could not hide from the demon. It might take the opportunity to attack. The northern heaven cold abyss was guarded by the great Kuan, so it was not afraid of external enemies. However, the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland could not withstand its power. Thus, the Black Tortoise was sent to watch over it. The night passed quickly. The Zenrins had already finished refining the instrument. After Zhang Yan discussed with the two sect masters, he flicked his finger toward the sky. A ray of mana entered the pivot on the top of the hall. The palace city rumbled and flew up. However, this time, it did not travel in the direction of the western sky border. Instead, it went up. Not long after, it broke through the air barrier and fell into the void. At this point, the palace city did not slow down. It looked like it was going to the depths of the void. The Zenrins were a little surprised at first. However, they all guessed that it was going to happen. They no longer paid attention to it and each of them adjusted their breathing and cultivation. After traveling like this for a few days, the palace city turned to the west. It traveled in the void several times and only stopped after about 2 months. If there were great divines among the heavenly ghosts standing on the peak of the shocking sky mountain and looking up, they would see that the palace city was hanging right above their heads. Chapter 1322. Sky-piercing capital's imperial palace continued to descend. When it was still quite a distance away from the mountain and sea realm, it stopped just now. Sect Master Qin and Yu Xianshao exchanged a few words, then said, Zhida, come forward. Meng Zhen nodded, stood up from his seat, and walked to the bottom of the steps. Yu Xianshao looked at Ing Chuanqiu and said, Disciple, come with us. Ing Chuanqiu also walked to the front and stood side by side with Meng Zhen. Sect Master Qin said, In a moment, Sect Master Yu will use his flying sword to cut open the blood qi barrier and lure Guizhu into the void to fight with me. When that time comes, the three of us won't have time to spare, so the profound techniques we prepared earlier will be handed over to you too. He waved his horsetail whisk, threw down a flawless jade, and said, There are two profound techniques in here. One is called Up to the Clear Sky. Once it is used, the person who is hit by it will feel as if they are carrying the mountains and oceans, their body will be heavy and it will be difficult to move. This second technique is called Wind and Cloud Roar. As long as it is used, it can follow the person's heart and change the weather. The power of the wind, rain, thunder and lightning can be increased by 1,000 times. Yu Xianshao also threw down a blood jade. This is a blood jade that Sect Master Zhang found from the demonic ancestor Green Melon. Master has placed a profound technique on it called Thousand Autumn's Heart. When used, any living being below Guizhu's level will consume 100 times more blood qi than usual. You must use it well. Meng Zhida and Ing Chuanqiu received it and bowed in acknowledgement. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, flicked his sleeve and sent the muddy tranquil water into the hands of the spiritual masters present. He said, This water can break the million-era mirror pagoda. After the Gui ancestors are lured away, you can use this to break into the shocking sky mountain. Everyone in the hall stood up and bowed respectfully. The two sect masters and Zhang Yan saw that the imperial palace was gradually approaching the mountain and sea realm. They nodded to each other, and 3 clear lights flashed on the jade platform. They were already outside the imperial palace, and they looked down at the shocking sky mountain. Sect Master Qin bowed and said, Thank you, Sect Master Yu. Yu Xianshao bowed again. He turned his divine will and saw a 10,000 feet long sword light that looked like a bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, it was upon the mountain and sea realm. But just as it was about to hit shocking sky mountain, suddenly an incomparably thick qi and blood barrier appeared out of thin air, blocking in front of him. However, the sword light was extremely sharp, and it instantly tore a long and deep gash in the barrier. Almost at the same time, as if something had been startled, the earth rumbled and shook. 3 obscure auras suddenly awakened under the ground, and then abruptly surged. Inside Yan Tian King City, Yan Zhi stood in front of a pillar. A skinny figure of a clansman showed up inside the pillar. At this moment, he was talking non-stop as if he was reporting something. The cultivators of the 9 continents have already recruited the scattered great magical abilities to the cold Jade Sea region. It seems like they are preparing to send help to the eastern wasteland. Lu Zhe asked, Is it true? That clansman replied, Clan leader, this is what the high sage who infiltrated the sects of the 9 continents said. I also tried to investigate, but I couldn't find any information. Yan Zhi fell into deep thought. Sending help to the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland was a very normal response. However, he had fought against the 9 continents for dozens of years, and he knew that his opponents were not simple. He had a feeling that things wouldn't go so smoothly, and that there might be other variables. He waved his hand, and the figure knelt down and bowed, then retreated from the pillar. Just as he was about to leave, suddenly, the ground beneath his feet trembled. At the same time, several auras surged into the palace, and the entire sky turned into a curtain of blood. His expression instantly changed, and he said, Who alarmed the 3 ancestor saints? Daoist Gua, who had been imprisoned next to the pillar, had his eyes half closed. Suddenly, his body trembled, and then his eyes shone. Yan Zhi sensed the change in his expression, and said coldly, True Sovereign Gua. Don't count on anything. If an enemy comes, I will kill you first. Daoist Gua changed his half-lying posture and straightened his upper body, looking at Yan Zhi with burning eyes. He said, Since King Yan said so, do you think that you can't defend this place? Yan Zhe also looked at him coldly, a murderous intent in his eyes, but he suppressed it in the end, and his expression became calm again. True sovereign Guo will see who wins and who loses. Taoist Guo nodded and said, I'll wait. After that, he returned to his previous posture, leaning against the pillar. Yan Zhe reached out his hand and picked up the sacrificial artifact, the elephant cane, from the rack, then turned and walked out. When he got to the balcony, he saw that the layer of blood qi outside Jingxiong Mountain had already appeared, but at this moment, there was a big cut on it, like a cocoon breaking out, and there seemed to be blood dripping from the wound. He felt that the threat came from above the universe, but when he looked up, he didn't see anything. So he put the cane in front of his eyebrows, and surged his blood qi into his eyes, looking outside the qi barrier. This time, he got something. He saw that there were 3 figures in the sky. In the middle was a Taoist with a horsetail whisk, and under his feet was an endless Milky Way, surging violently. Even though they were separated by tens of thousands of miles, he could still hear the sound of the surging tide, which kept shaking his mind. On the left was a person with a straight nose and a broad forehead, with divine light in his eyes. He stood in the bright Milky Way with his hands clasped behind his back. Outside his body, starlight flew, intersecting and colliding. Looking at him like this, he felt the sound of sword qi coming from his chest. On the right was a young Taoist with an imposing appearance and a handsome face. He wore a black robe with fluttering sleeves. Outside the robe, there were red and purple flames flying. Behind him, there was a huge, indistinguishable demon image. When one looked at it, it was as if one's soul was going to sink into it. It was just that in a hurry, before he could take a closer look, he heard a cracking sound. The pearls and gems on the elephant cane cracked, turning into fragments and falling down. His body trembled violently, and a mouthful of blood rushed up. He couldn't help but cough it out, and the blood fell on the ground, smashing several bricks. This was because the divine abilities of the people in front of him were so powerful that they exceeded the limits of his body. If it wasn't for the elephant truncheon, he would have been severely injured. However, he had also figured out the identity of his enemies. He wiped the corner of his mouth and thought, so it's the cultivators of the 9 continents. These 3 people should be the great magical power of those cultivators. But since the ancestor saints have been alarmed, they should be able to deal with it. He took a breath, and the blood that he spat out suddenly turned into mist, which was then absorbed back into his body. He walked forward with steady steps. In the great hall of King City, the clan masters and elders of the 9 tribes had all arrived, but most of them were at a loss. They couldn't help but panic. Ever since King City was built, no outside enemies had ever come. Even when fighting against foreign races and demons, their clansmen were sent out to do it. It could be said that the Heaven Ghoul tribe living in King City was used to enjoying life, and they had long forgotten how to fight against enemies. Now that they were suddenly invaded, they were all deeply frightened. At this moment, they heard the whistling of the horn, followed by a loud shout from the hall's attendants. Lao Zhe walked out from the back of the hall with an elephant's staff in his hand. He only raised his hand, and everyone's heart unconsciously calmed down. Ma Zhe looked at the elders and said solemnly, the enemy is the cultivators of the 9 continents. Elder Qi, release the blood and fire, and summon the great sages and demons to the ancestral tribe to help. Qi Hua bowed and said, Hua respectfully accepts the royal order. The Heaven Ghoul race didn't just have their own great sages, there were many foreign races and demons that had reached this realm. If they gathered together, they would be a powerful force. Ma Zhe looked at Sui Jianqing and said, Elder Sui Jian, how many great sages were sent to the eastern wastelands to help Elder Lian? Where are they now? Sui Jianqing said, a total of 26. Since they left on the cloud-crossing whale, they should be on the southern sea continent by now. Ma Zhe said, summon the rest. Sui Jianqing hesitated and said, but should we call Elder Lian Zhao's troops as well? Ma Zhe shook his head and said, no need. If we don't keep an eye on the grand mystic cultivators of the eastern wastelands, they might come and attack us. Sui Jianqing's heart shook, and he nodded. Ma Zhe asked again, How much blood medicine do we have in the palace warehouse? How many clansmen can we provide to refine their blood energy and enter the awakening saint realm? A white-bearded elder stood up and said, My king, there are countless blood medicine, but only 20 or so clansmen in the city have a chance of entering the awakening saint realm. Maja said, Consume the blood medicine. There will be a fierce battle next. If these clansmen can enter the awakening saint realm in 1 or 2 days, this king will reward them greatly. The elder said in shock, If we rush them like this, I'm afraid only 30% will succeed. The rest of the clansmen will be in danger, my king, but Maja waved his elephant staff and stopped him. He said, If our ancestral tribe can survive this crisis, we will have a future. On the plains outside of Shocking Sky Mountain, rays of blood-red light rose up and gradually stood up. 3 huge figures stood up, all of them supporting the sky and supporting the earth. It was as if they could touch the mountain and sea chi wall with just a lift of their heads. 2 of them reached out and grabbed a vermilion mountain that was placed in the ancestral temple. Just as they were about to swallow them, a streak of sword light that seemed to be able to split heaven and earth flashed, slicing their bodies apart. However, in the next instant, their bodies fused back together. The sword light then scattered, turning into millions of rays of light that sprinkled down from the sky. For a moment, it seemed like countless meteors were falling from the sky. The 2 giant figures seemed to know that it was difficult to resist. They roared in unison and exploded their bodies, turning into monstrous seas of blood that rained down on the Vermilion Mountain. In just a few breaths, their bodies reformed, and they slowly stood up. It could be seen that their vital energy and blood had grown twice as large as before. The 2 sect masters Qin and Yu, as well as Zhang Yan, stood outside the barrier, watching the changes below indifferently. Guizu's strength was enough to shatter the continent beneath their feet, so they didn't want to fight him on Sky Shocker Mountain. If these 3 Guizu were worried about the safety of their clansmen, they would leave the mountain and sea realm and fight them in the void. But it was also possible that they didn't care about the deaths of their clansmen, and that didn't matter. As long as they used their divine abilities and flying swords to attack from afar, they would sooner or later attack. Zhang Yan's eyes turned and noticed that the giant figure standing in the middle had just stood there quietly, not moving at all. Even if it hadn't swallowed the Vermilion Mountain, the aura it exuded was far stronger than that of its 2 companions. Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly as he said, This must be the heavenly ghost ancestor. Chapter 1323. After fusing with the Vermilion Mountain, the 2 giant figures' auras soared, and they raised their fierce eyes to stare at the sky. Their appearances were roughly different from the Fire Mane ghost ancestors. Their bodies were covered in a thick layer of blood, and they vaguely looked like they had 3 heads and 8 arms. The heavenly ghost ancestor seemed to be very calm from beginning to end. He glanced at Zhang Yan and the others, as if saying something. The 2 ghost ancestors roared, stretched out their hands, and tore open the barrier, squeezing their bodies out. When they were outside the mountain and sea realm, the blood around the 3 of them burst into flames, as if 3 blazing suns had suddenly appeared in the void. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and flicked his finger, sending out a red and purple fireball. At first, it was only a small cluster, but as it flew forward, it grew larger and larger. By the time it reached the 3 ghost ancestors, it was so huge that there was nowhere for them to hide. One of the ghost ancestors stepped forward, opened his arms, and met the fireball head-on. The fireball was blocked halfway, and then it exploded. The ghost ancestor was also blown to pieces. However, after a breath of time, countless drops of blood flew over and gathered into a wriggling ball of blood. A moment later, a body, a head, 4 limbs, and feet grew back. Astonishingly, he was restored to his original state. However, although he had relied on his indestructible body to break through the oncoming flames, he wasn't in a good state. Just now, the blood he had recovered had been burned away by the flames, and the flames on his body had dimmed significantly. Zhang Yan pointed and said, Sect Master Reverend, Sect Master Yu, this ghost ancestor's body is tough, but the foundation of his strength is his blood. As long as his blood doesn't run dry, he won't die. Therefore, when he fights, he doesn't fear death. Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "Let me test him." He flicked his horsetail whisk, and a heavenly river appeared in the void, rolling forward without beginning or end. The three ghost ancestors couldn't avoid it. Looking at how vast the river was, it seemed difficult to resist. They could only do their best to stabilize their bodies. However, they didn't feel any external force. It was as if it was just an invisible illusion. Looking to his left and right, he could still see his other two companions. However, it was empty. Clearly, he was the only one here. Sect Master Qin had already cultivated the Xuanzi True Wonders upper hole technique to the extreme, and after entering the mortal transformation realm, he naturally comprehended many exquisite divine arts. Even though the three Gui ancestors had landed in the same heavenly river, they were separated by hundreds of millions of kilometers. Even if they could see each other, it would take decades or even centuries for them to get close to each other. Zhang Yan looked down. If these three Gui ancestors didn't have a special method to break this divine ability, then they could only fight on their own. He and the two sect masters would first join forces to deal with one of them, and after that, they would deal with the other two. However, he could feel that the enemies in front of them weren't easy to deal with. True enough. The heavenly ghost ancestor let out a strange cry, and the two heads on the back of his head began to move and grow. Then, a torso appeared. At the same time, the two Gui ancestors trembled, and their bodies slowly melted away. The heavenly ghost ancestor's body grew back as much as they disappeared. He was borrowing their bodies. Then, he gave birth. This was a divine ability that only the heavenly ghost ancestor possessed. All of his clansmen, even the Gui ancestors, were his juniors. As long as they were willing, they could pay a portion of their own qi and blood to summon any of their clansmen from their bodies. Seeing this, Sect Master Qin said, "I heard from Temple Master Du Zhen that these outsiders in the mountain and sea realm are similar to the demons and devils of the 9 continents. The more they cultivate, the easier it is for them to merge with heaven and earth. Few can break through the outer heavens. However, this heavenly ghost's qi and blood overflow without leaking. With 10,000 years of cultivation, he might be able to break through his own shackles and truly break through the outer heavens. If we don't kill him this time, there will be endless troubles in the future." Yu Xianshao smiled coldly and said, "No matter how powerful he is, since he's already here, he can forget about returning to the mountain and sea realm." He waved his sleeve, and 3 beams of sword light descended. However, they were illusory and unstable, as if they could dissipate at any moment. This sword technique was called solitary serenity. No matter which lineage of sword was passed down, as long as one cultivated it to a high level, they could use this technique. If the opponent was struck by it, and their cultivation was insufficient, they would be killed from another realm. When Patriarch Hong He faced off against the Xian Du bird, these demonic birds had all leaped into the void, hoping to lure him into their own realm. However, this ancestor didn't move. He simply used this technique, slashed out with his sword, and then ignored them. When the demonic birds saw that they couldn't lure him out, they charged back into the 9 continents realm. However, at this time, the demonic birds all fell to the ground as if they had been slashed by a sword. The king bird was also severely injured, and its head crashed into the middle pillar continent, causing the upper half of the continent to collapse. At this moment, the same sword was flying over. The 2 Gui ancestors saw that it wasn't fast, so they tried to evade it. However, regardless of whether they dissipated their bodies or burned them with yang flames, it was useless. In the end, the sword light still caught up to them. Only the heavenly ghost ancestor didn't move from the very beginning. He allowed the sword light to sink into his chest, and he only glanced at Yu Xianshao. Yu Xianshao nodded and said, "This heavenly ghost really does have some skill." As soon as he used this technique, it would land on its target. Everything that could be seen from the outside was just an illusion, so there was no way to evade or dispel it. If these 3 Gui ancestors turned around and returned to the mountain and sea realm, they would definitely end up like the Xian Du bird. If they wanted to break the technique, they could only kill the person who used it, or wait in the void for hundreds of years. Then, the technique would naturally dissipate. The three Gui ancestors obviously didn't want to do that. They sensed that they were in danger, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they transformed into streaks of blood-colored light and rushed toward the three Gui ancestors. In the mountain and sea realm, as the heavenly ghost ancestor Yaozhe passed down orders, the entire heavenly king city began to move. Because there was enough blood medicine, more than 50 heavenly ghost clansmen swallowed the blood medicine in an attempt to become saints. As for how many of them would survive, it was still unknown. Outside the palace, clouds rose up, and the silhouettes of cloud whales appeared. It was the great saints of the heavenly ghost clans who had come to help. The ancestral decrees didn't actually bind them much, and they had done many things in the past. If they could, they would have found all sorts of excuses to evade. However, the elders of the various clans were all here, so they had no choice but to come. Meng Zhida and Ing Chuanqiu had been paying attention to the heavenly ghosts' movements. The two sect masters had entrusted the profound technique item to them, but when they would release it would depend on how well they would control it. Fortunately, both of them were calm people and weren't in a hurry to make a contribution. At this moment, Meng Zhen sensed that many tyrannical auras had appeared in King City. He pondered for a moment, then said, "The heavenly ghost ancestor tribe seems to be gathering more people. I think we should wait for them. What does Ing Zhenren think?" Ing Chuanqiu nodded and said, "That's exactly what I was thinking. Under the cover of my profound technique, it doesn't matter how many demonic saints there are. The heavenly ghost ancestor king doesn't understand the divine ability of the 9 continents, so he made a wrong move." Just now, in addition to Zhang Yan and the others, Yaozhe also vaguely saw a palace, so he knew that there would be many more enemies. When he saw the 3 ghost ancestors escape into the void, he issued several more orders, telling all clans to be on high alert. From top to bottom, everyone in King City was on guard. However, after waiting for several hours, no one came to attack. He was very surprised, and thought to himself, could it be that the other side wants to wait until the outcome of the battle with the ancestral saints is decided before they make a move? He didn't know that there was a profound technique on the other side, so this thought was reasonable. However, as the clan master, he wouldn't pin his hopes on the enemy, so he still followed the original plan and gathered all the great sages to the ancestral tribe. Another half a day passed, but there was still no movement in the sky. At this time, the 26 great sages had returned, and in King City, there were 2 more who entered enlightenment and became sages. On the other hand, there were also more than 20 clansmen who couldn't withstand the blood medicine's effect and died alive. Yaozhe was relieved. There were nearly 100 great sages gathered in King City, and there were millions of world reflection towers guarding outside. He thought that even if there was another demonic ancestor-level opponent, as long as he gathered the blood and chi of many clansmen, he would be able to resist it. Outside the chi barrier, Ing Chuanqiu saw that there were no more powerful auras emerging from the heavenly ghost ancestor, so he said, "Brother Meng, it seems that we can activate the profound technique now." Meng Zhida also knew that the time had come. With a solemn expression, he lifted Lian Yu up and pressed his other hand up. After a while, he released the first profound technique, Wind and Cloud Roar. A beam of spiritual light shot out and landed on the mountain and sea realm's heavenly wall. The aura spread out and enveloped the shocking sky mountain and the plains outside. Sect Master Qin said that this technique could change the weather at will. Sure enough, he sensed that there was a divine will connecting him to this part of the world. As long as he willed it, he could summon clouds and summon rain. With his own cultivation, it wasn't difficult for him to do this, but with the help of the divine will, he felt a connection between heaven and earth, and he unconsciously understood. In the past few decades, as his magic power had deepened, he had gradually come into contact with that barrier. His cultivation had also been polished to perfection, and he only needed to take that final step. At this moment, with the guidance of the divine will profound technique, he suddenly felt enlightened. He felt that after he returned, as long as he went into secluded meditation for a period of time, he would be able to shed his mortal body and no longer be bound by this part of the world. In the sky above the shocking sky mountain plains, dark clouds gradually filled the air. lightning snaked about endlessly, as if a storm was about to hit. The great sages of the heavenly ghost tribe all felt that something was wrong. The land here was incomparably vast, and there were many hills, forests, swamps, and lakes. Often, there would be a downpour in one place, and the sun would shine brightly on the other. The changes in the weather would not be completely the same. Maja looked up closely. He was sure that this was caused by the cultivators of the 9 continents. Furthermore, he could vaguely feel that there seemed to be something extra between heaven and earth. However, the changes in the weather might be a threat to the ordinary people, but not to the great sages. Because he couldn't guess their intentions, he could only wait and see. Chapter 1324. Taoist Master Meng released a profound technique and felt his aura fluctuate slightly. After waiting for his aura to slow down for a moment, he raised his hand and caressed the jade, activating the second profound technique, up to the blue sky. Ing Chuanxiu also took out the blood jade and rubbed it with his palm, releasing the 1,000 years of heart reversal. Different from the previous Xian technique, the 2 rays of spiritual light shone down and seeped into the mountains and plains. However, the millions of world reflection towers that were placed on top of the heavenly palace did not move. This was also reasonable. Under the shroud of the profound technique, even the great formations of the various sects in the 9 continents could not withstand it, let alone these jade pagodas that only had a pure defensive power. Naturally, they would not have any reaction. As soon as the 2 Xian techniques descended, the great sages immediately felt that something was wrong. They felt their bodies become extremely heavy and could not stand up straight. They quickly circulated their qi and blood to resist this force. However, this action was shocking. The qi and blood in their bodies were being consumed rapidly, as if they would be used up in a short while. What is going on? Many of the elders in the hall, who were usually pampered and lived like princes, suddenly panicked as they did not know what had happened. Although Lu Zhi did not know the use of the Xian technique, he immediately made the right choice. He withdrew his qi and blood and stood in the palace with his strong body. He shouted, "Everyone, do not panic. If we do not use our qi and blood, we will be fine." Sui Jianqing said anxiously, "My king, if we do not use our qi and blood, we will be fine. However, if someone attacks, how can we control the World Reflection Tower?" Lu Zhi thought for a while and quickly came up with an idea. He said, "Take out the blood medicine from the palace storage and distribute it. Elder Sui Jian, bring your clansmen to guard the tower. If they feel unwell, Elder Qi will bring them up. Elder Qi will come down and my clansmen will go up. This way, as long as there is enough blood medicine, it will not be hard to hold on. As long as the ancestral saints can defeat the enemies, we will be able to get through this." Sui Jianqing had lost most of his strength due to the influence of his qi and blood. He was very uneasy, but after hearing this arrangement, he could not help but feel relieved. The blood medicine had been accumulated for tens of thousands of years. It could also last for a year or so. After Lu Zhi made the arrangements, he thought for a while and felt that Priest Guo must know the reason. He found a trusted servant and ordered, "Go and ask True God Guo what happened." The attendant asked worriedly, "Will Guo Zhenjuan tell us?" Lu Zhi said calmly, "If he doesn't want to break his promise, he will." The attendant quickly turned around. Due to the pressure of the profound technique and being unable to use his qi and blood, he could only walk back and forth. Panting heavily, he said, "True Monarch Guo said that he knows what's going on, but he can't solve it. However, no technique or divine ability can last for a long time. Your Majesty, as long as you wait patiently, you might be able to pull through." Hearing this, Maja fell into deep thought. At this moment, a dark wind suddenly blew from the sky. He didn't pay much attention to it. However, the wind was incomparably fierce. With a loud boom, the bronze lions and iron elephants placed in front of the hall were swept up and smashed into the palace walls. Meanwhile, outside Jingxiong Mountain, a mountain range actually collapsed with a rumble. His expression changed slightly, and he immediately shouted, "Quick, the clansmen of the inner city move into the palace to hide." Heaven Visitation Palace was built with the power of the heaven ghosts. It was unusually sturdy. Even though the wind howled outside, it couldn't break in, and the clansmen inside the city could hide. However, the billions of heaven ghouls in Jingxiong upper plains were not so lucky. Due to the restriction of up to the blue sky, almost all of them were pressed to the ground, unable to move at all. However, when they were swept up by the wind, many people with insufficient qi and blood were immediately swept into the sky. In the blink of an eye, their bodies were torn apart, and then mixed with the stones and wind. In order to stabilize themselves, the heaven ghoul great sages had to use their qi and blood. However, this was just drinking poison to quench their thirst. Not long after, they were forced to think of a way to support each other and grab each other's arms. With everyone working together, they gradually stabilized themselves. But at this time, not only were the heaven ghoul clansmen suppressed by the profound technique, many demon great sages affiliated with Jingxiong Mountain were also affected. Cha Qingyi half knelt on the ground, gritting his teeth as he looked up. Since escaping from the cold Jade Sea province, he first sought refuge with the Heart Butterfly tribe, but later saw that this tribe had allied with the cultivators of the 9 continents. Afraid that his identity would be exposed, he had no choice but to go to the Western Desolate Domain to seek refuge with the Heaven Ghoul tribe. If he had a choice, he would never come here. This was because the Heaven Ghoul tribe had a strict hierarchy. Outsiders like him who sought refuge with them could only be regarded as the lowest tribe members. Even demon sages were no exception. Even a member of the upper tribe could casually scold him. Fortunately, his magical power was extraordinary, so it was worth using. He thought that he had a strong backing and no longer had to be afraid, but he didn't know that the cultivators of the 9 continents would go to the Western Desolate Domain. At this moment, the disadvantage of not being a Heaven Ghoul clansman was revealed. Not only could he not get any blood medicine, no one paid attention to him, so he could only struggle alone. When the gale finally weakened a little, it began to rain again. The raindrops were tough, powerful, and incomparably pure. When they fell on the plains, they immediately smashed deep holes. Even the palaces on the plains were riddled with holes under the bombardment. Chaja sat on the throne, his eyes extremely calm. He had rejected the request of the elders to use the World Reflection Tower to protect the tribe members several times. In his opinion, as long as the people of the upper 9 tribes in Royal City were safe, it was worth it even if all the people of the lower tribe on the plains died. Meng Zhen controlled the profound technique from above. He knew that this place would be the mountain gate of the Shaoqing sect, so he didn't want to go too far. At this moment, the Heaven Ghoul was already extremely weak, so he withdrew some of his power and bowed to Ing Chuanxiu, saying, "Ingzhen Ren, I need to control the astronomical phenomenon with all my strength, so I'm afraid that I won't be able to take care of the matters outside. I'll have to trouble you, sir." Ing Chuanxiu bowed back and said, "You're too polite, Brother Meng." He stood up and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoists, you may act now." Then he leaped forward, transforming into a sword light that shot out of the void. Clear streams of light flew out from the imperial palace, piercing through the air barrier and heading toward the mountain and sea realm. As if sensing the movements on this side, at the same time, the countless world observation towers also flew out, protecting the shocking sky mountain within. When Meng Zhen saw this, he activated the power of the thunderstorm. Bolts of lightning struck down from the 9th heaven, tearing through the sky and bombarding the Jade Tower. For a moment, the sky covered by the dark clouds flickered, and the rumbling sound echoed over the plains. Under the restrictions of the profound technique, activating the World Reflection Tower would double the consumption of blood and qi. By the time the perfected masters of the various sects landed in front of shocking Sky Mountain, Sui Jian, who was in charge of the Jade Tower, could no longer continue, and was replaced by the Qi clan. The perfected masters of the various sects were not in a hurry to use the muddy serene water. Instead, they bombarded the tower with magical treasures and divine abilities, carefully observing the changes of the tower and looking for flaws. Lu Zhe, however, frowned inwardly. He could not bear to be in such a passive position. Seeing that there were only about 30 people, he stood up and said, "Everyone, we will lose if we defend for too long. We need to attack. Sui Jianqing said, but the elder's blood and qi are not enough. Lu Zhi interrupted him, with the help of the World Reflection Tower, and the number of our clansmen, what's the big deal about consuming some blood and qi? Follow me and kill our way out. Sui Jianqing was shocked and came forward to stop him. Your Majesty, you must not. He knelt down and tried to persuade, Your Majesty, you are the leader of our clans. If you are harmed, the hearts of the people will be scattered. Also, Yu Qing, lead the clansmen to fight the enemy. In the void, sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk and swung it down. In an instant, a celestial river appeared in front of them. The three blood-red lights rushed over and were immediately caught in it. Although they were flying fast, they could feel that the river was expanding as they moved forward. It seemed that no matter how hard they tried, they could not reach the other side. Just as they were about to use their divine abilities to resist, the void suddenly lit up and hundreds of millions of sword lights shot out. The three Gui ancestors knew how powerful the sword lights were and immediately used their ethereal transformation. However, the sword lights also turned from solid to ethereal and slashed at the invisible. Being stirred like this, the three figures were like reflections in the water. With a sway of the water, they began to sway and break apart, and the more they moved, the more intense they became, as if they were going to turn into countless pieces. Knowing that the enemy's sword light contained another profoundness, he could no longer use his virtual body to face the enemy, so he turned back, but the sword light also changed, and continued to slash down on their bodies, each sword strike cutting off a strand of qi and blood. The three Gui ancestors were strong, but they knew that if they did not find a way to change, they would not be able to bear it. The heavenly ghost ancestor shouted to the Gui ancestor on the left. The latter took a deep breath and blew out a cloud of blue flame. Wherever this flame passed, the river in front of them suddenly split apart and the thousands of sword lights were shattered. Even the void around them showed signs of collapsing. This Gui Zu's name was Han Yi. Among his many divine abilities, he was the most proficient in the virtual form technique. He had already cultivated the Yang to Yin realm and refined his Yuan fire. The turbid fire in his abdomen could burn through invisible barriers, transform into the netherworld wind, and change energy. If it were not for the fact that this flame consumed a great deal of vitality, he would have been able to break most divine abilities. Sect masters Qin and Yu, as well as Zhang Yan, saw all of this. After exchanging a few words with their divine wills, they all nodded. Gui ancestors' ability could not be underestimated. Just now, their actions were partly to probe and partly to force the opponent to use his trump card. Once they understood the other side's strength, it would not be difficult to find a loophole in their divine wills. Zhang Yan watched as the other side released their shackles and pressed forward again. With a wave of his sleeve, the black flames behind him condensed into chains and fell down. Just now, Gui ancestor Han Yi had gained the upper hand and reversed the disadvantageous situation. Feeling proud of himself, he took the initiative to step forward and spat out another mouthful of flame. However, as soon as the two collided, they melted and swallowed each other. After a few breaths, the black flames gained the upper hand and continued to press forward, seemingly on the verge of collapse. The heavenly ghost ancestor called out to stop, but Gui ancestor Han Yi turned a deaf ear to him and refused to retreat. The heavenly ghost ancestor could not help feeling a little dissatisfied, but he also knew that both Gui ancestors were irritated by their vitality and were easily angered. This was innate and could not be suppressed unless one's cultivation reached a certain level. As such, he let out a strange roar towards the void. As soon as this roar sounded, the black flames instantly disappeared, as if they had never appeared. Chapter 1325. Although the heavenly ghost ancestor had broken the black flame chain, he had been delayed for a moment. Just now, the heavenly river that had been split apart was surging over again. Seeing that he was about to be wrapped up again, he did not dare to stay where he was and immediately rushed out with the two Gui ancestors. However, at this moment, more sword lights leapt out of the void and chased after them, relentlessly cutting away their vitality and essence. One of the heads behind the heavenly ghost ancestors suddenly turned around and roared into the sky again. The descending sword lights dissipated, and even the heavenly river in front of him collapsed and disappeared. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. The heavenly ghoul ancestor had used this technique twice in a row. It looked ferocious and unstoppable, but Zhang Yan wasn't deceived by its appearance. At first glance, this divine ability was extremely similar to the words of law enforcement, but in fact, it utilized an unknown and wondrous transformation. Otherwise, with just a single word, he could drive the three of them out of this world. Wouldn't that be easy? Moreover, it was not difficult to see that there must be a limit and a price to pay. It could not be used without restraint. On the heavenly ghost ancestor's side, just now, the predicament in front of him had been resolved. However, before he could go far, he looked up and saw waves after waves leaping out of the void, blocking his way. These rivers of water seemed to be able to be crossed in a few steps, but he knew that he would never be able to reach his opponent if he just rushed over. Zhang Yan and the two sect masters stood in different places, looking at the opposite side with indifferent expressions. If these three heavenly ghosts couldn't break through the current situation, then they only needed to maintain their divine abilities and wait for their opponent to exhaust his vitality. Facing the predicament before him, there was no violence or impatience in the heavenly ghost ancestor's eyes, only calmness. At this moment, he realized that he was far from being the opponent's match in terms of divine abilities. If this continued, he would only be led by the nose. Right now, the key was to get out of here as soon as possible. He turned his gaze. Looking into the void, it only took a moment for him to find the star corresponding to the heavenly ghost clan and communicate with it. In an instant, a ray of starlight shone on his body. With a loud shout, he took the other two Gui ancestors and flew away from the heavenly river. Even the sword light passed through their bodies. At this moment, the three sky ghosts seemed to have gone to another part of the void. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, quite decisive. Yu Xianxiao said indifferently, that's just an emergency. I'll calculate where he'll go and wait for him ahead. In reality, the heavenly ghost ancestor had not been able to break through the siege of the heavenly river this time. He had only used a trick and borrowed the help of the natal star to temporarily escape the shackles of the divine ability. However, just as Yu Xianxiao had said, this wasn't the fundamental solution. It was like a person who was swimming in the ocean. Because he couldn't find the opposite shore, he climbed up a tree to catch his breath. It looked like he had escaped from the water, but in fact, he was still trapped. But if he was lucky, he could find a place to settle down in time, and he might be able to get out of this unfavorable situation. However, because he was forced to escape, he had lost the opportunity to take the initiative, and his opponent clearly knew what he was doing. If there was someone powerful enough to calculate where his divine ability would land, it wouldn't be difficult to trap him again. Sect leader Qin and sect leader Yu were both able to do this. Sect leader Qin and sect leader Yu were both able to do this. Yu Xianxiao raised his divine sense and made some calculations. His eyes lit up, and he pointed with his finger. A sword light slashed toward the endless void. The three Gui ancestors had been swimming in the starlight for a long time, but in the eyes of the outside world, it was only an instant. Just as they were about to come out, the heavenly ghost ancestor's eyes flickered. He seemed to have sensed something. At this moment, a strange aura appeared on his body, and he suddenly took a step forward and dodged the sword light that slashed towards him. In the senses of the two sect leaders and Zhang Yan, they seemed to have gone to another part of the void at the same time. Sect leader Qin was slightly surprised and said, I didn't expect this person to have already found some of his roots. It's really not easy. Yu Xianxiao sneered and said, after all, he hasn't obtained the proper inheritance. If he dares to use it like this, if the enemy finds his roots, he will immediately become a skeleton in a grave. At their level of cultivation, the only way to find their own roots was to rely on their own strength to move freely in the void. They wouldn't be bound by the world, and they could also avoid tribulations and disasters. Qi Dao cultivators had to pass this test to enter the mortal transformation realm. However, strength Dao cultivators might not be able to do so. They needed to temper their cultivation, temper their body, and slowly comprehend it. If they couldn't find their roots, they would be mixed with the world and be trapped in a world. It was the same for those who cultivated chi and blood in the mountain and sea realm. This heavenly ghost ancestor had to break through the heaven and earth barrier again and again before he could comprehend it. Although Zhang Yan had reached the sixth revolution of the Strength Tao, he hadn't found his roots yet. This wasn't because his cultivation wasn't strong enough, but because he realized that his divine contract wasn't something that could be obtained through meditation. It had fallen into an indescribable place, and he had to find it himself. However, Heavenly Ghost Progenitor had used his own root fruit to evade the divine art, which was a significant loss to his cultivation. Perhaps it would only take 10,000 years to break through the void realm, but as a result, it would take several times longer. Even though the price he paid was great, he was still able to escape from his opponent's restraints. As soon as he returned to the void, he straightened his arms behind him and formed seals. Instantly, multicolored rays of light shot towards him, and every single one of them contained great power. The two Gui ancestors also rushed forward. They had been suppressed this whole time and couldn't use their divine abilities. They had been holding back their anger, and now they wanted to vent it. Before Gui ancestor Han Han arrived, he spat out a mouthful of turbid flames. Zhang Yan stood motionless as the black flames around him fell down to block the flames. At the same time, the demon statue behind him sucked in a deep breath. Gui ancestor Han Han felt his soul being pulled away from his body. Horrified, he hurriedly tried to steady himself, but his cultivation wasn't as high as Ghost Ancestor Firemane's, and he had only experienced the first transformation tribulation. For a moment, his body swayed, and it looked like he was about to collapse. Heavenly Ghost Ancestor was doing his best at this moment, chanting a series of strange syllables in an attempt to suppress the two sect masters, but he was powerless to do anything. The other Gui ancestor named Mo Yang shrugged and a head flew out from behind his neck, disappearing in a flash. A moment later, a strange ghost face the size of a star appeared above Zhang Yan's head, opened its mouth wide, and sucked in the air below. He had refined a chaotic space domain in his stomach, and as long as one was sucked in, unless one's cultivation was several times higher than his, it would be difficult to escape. Zhang Yan sensed that the suction force wasn't strong, and if he tried, he could break free, but at the same time, he noticed that the vitality required to activate this divine ability was incredible. This technique was likely not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Yang Kai didn't underestimate it. After some calculations, he found that if this technique couldn't devour the opponent, it would most likely not dissipate until its vitality was exhausted. If he forcibly resisted it, even if he was only entangled for 3 or 4 breaths, Gui ancestor Han Han would be able to escape. Yang Kai's mind raced. Since this technique could only be broken by devouring him, he might as well give it to him. Circulating his strength, Yang Kai split off a Xian Yang clone. After landing outside, this clone immediately flew up into the sky and threw itself into the mouth of the ghost face. The ghostly face didn't refuse anything and immediately swallowed it. It closed its mouth and the suction force immediately disappeared. Ghost ancestor Mo Yang couldn't help being startled. He didn't expect Zhang Yan to resolve his divine ability in such a simple way. Although he could still urge the ghost face to exert its power again, it would take at least 10 breaths of time. Seeing that Gui ancestor Han Han was becoming more and more exhausted, Ghost ancestor Mo Yang let out an angry roar and leaned forward. Like a blazing sun, he smashed towards Yang Kai. Zhang Yan sneered and raised his sleeve. A huge hand that blotted out the sky reached out and grabbed him. Then, he casually tossed him out. Then, he activated the demonic image and increased the power of the attack by 30%. Just when Ghost Ancestor Han Han's soul was about to be pulled out, Heavenly Ghost Ancestor could no longer ignore him and let out a strange roar. In Zhang Yan's perception, Ghost Ancestor Han Han had disappeared in an instant. At the same time, a head popped up on one of Heavenly Ghost Ancestor's shoulders, and a breath later, Ghost Ancestor Han Han grew out again. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly, and he was about to take action again when the divine intent of the two sect masters suddenly called out to him. With a thought, he also withdrew his divine intent into an unknown void. Yu Xianshao stood in front with his hands behind his back and said, Heavenly Ghost Ancestor can summon his clansmen into his body. No matter how dangerous his two clansmen are, he can save them at the critical moment. The key to this battle is him. As long as we kill him, the other two will be nothing to worry about. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, Heavenly Ghost Ancestor is tyrannical and has a strong vitality. He is the strongest of the three heavenly ghosts, but if I directly confront him, it will be exactly what he wants. However, since he can swallow his clansmen, I think we might as well push the boat along with the current. Yu Xianshao asked, I wonder what Sage Zhang's plan is. Zhang Yan smiled and said meaningfully, the moment the heavenly ghost ancestor swallows his two clansmen, it will be our opportunity. Yu Xianshao thought for a moment and immediately understood what he meant. Sage Zhang's plan is to stop his yin-yang transformation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, that's right. Sect Master Qin nodded and said, this method is feasible. Just now, when the heavenly ghost ancestor took in two of his clansmen, his aura was a little rough, and it was only after he released one of them from his body that his aura returned to normal. Obviously, having two ghost ancestors in his body is a great burden to him. Yu Xianshao thought for a moment and nodded. When there was cold, there would be warmth. When there was light, there would be darkness. When there was a rise, there would be a fall. Once the heavenly ghost ancestor took in two of his clansmen, even if he couldn't release them, he would have to use other methods to deal with them. If he was obstructed at this time, the circulation of his vitality would definitely be restricted. More importantly, if there was only one heavenly ghost ancestor left, it would be relatively easier to deal with him. Chapter 1326. The two sect leaders thought that Zhang Yan's suggestion was feasible. The only thing they had to be wary of was the supernatural power that was almost as powerful as words. Sect Master Qin said, just now, I've deduced it with my divine will. The ancestor of the heavenly ghost has already comprehended the root fruit. As long as he's willing to sacrifice his cultivation, he can avoid any divine ability. The two ghost ancestors are of the same origin as him, so they can be protected by the divine ability. In fact, when two cultivators who had both comprehended the root fruit fought, they would never use it to avoid disasters so unscrupulously. It was just that the ancestor of the heavenly ghost didn't know how to save and cherish it, so this situation occurred. Yu Xianshao said, in that case, not only does he want to go to outer space, but he also wants to take his clansmen away with him. Sect Master Qin said, the ancestor of heavenly ghost shares some similarities with the spirit, qi, and blood of the other two clansmen. If they could merge into one, they would be able to produce an even greater transformation. It's just that this fellow's cultivation hasn't reached the level yet, so he hasn't done so yet. Yu Xianshao sneered, just now, seeing that he's taking care of his clansmen, I know there must be a reason. Zhang Yan pondered and said, although the fire main ghost ancestor is also hot-tempered, he is very different from the other two ghost ancestors. Moreover, rumor has it that he has always been a loner and is not on the same side as the other ghost ancestors. Now it seems that he is hiding from the sky ghost ancestor. The three of them discussed for a while more, then their divine wills returned to their bodies. They had the help of the divine wills, which meant that they could try to find a way to break the opponent's divine ability if necessary. Of course, using the divine wills also consumed their essence qi and magic power. In a battle, they couldn't use it from the beginning to the end. However, even if they only used it for a moment, they would still have a great advantage. For example, if two people with very similar magic power and cultivation, one side could still stop and think carefully at a critical moment, then the result was self-evident. The heavenly ghost progenitor's cultivation base was considered profound, and he was also very sensitive to auras. In his opinion, the opponent seemed to have changed, and the situation seemed to have become unfavorable to him. When the Sky Ghoul ancestor saw the three of them, he suddenly sensed something different about his opponents. However, he didn't understand why this was the case. However, this feeling came from his own root fruit, so it couldn't be faked. As such, he immediately became extremely vigilant. Zhang Yan didn't care about what happened to him and followed his plan. The two sect masters would contain the heavenly ghost progenitor while he tried to deal with Han Hui and Mo Yang. 1 against 2 seemed to be at a disadvantage, but judging from the fighting power displayed by the heavenly ghost ancestor, even if the two Gui ancestors were tied together, they would not necessarily be able to contend against him. However, he wasn't going to act according to the plan. If he could really kill his opponent in battle, he wouldn't show any mercy. He turned his eyes and saw that ghost ancestor Mo Yang, who had just now been thrown away by him, had turned back aggressively, and the ghost face floating in the sky had opened its mouth again. A suction force immediately appeared in the surroundings. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Kai tried to sense his surroundings but found that he couldn't contact Xian Yang's clone. However, he clearly felt that this clone hadn't been damaged, but was instead trapped in a certain space and couldn't come out. As long as he could get rid of this Gui ancestor, he would be free. However, Yang Kai didn't care. Even if he couldn't come out, it didn't matter. At most, he would lose some of his magic power. As long as he went back and meditated for a few days, he would be able to recover. Ghost ancestor Han Hui approached and spat out another mouthful of turbid fire. Zhang Yan smiled. This divine ability had clearly been restrained by the demonic fire on his body, but this heavenly ghost progenitor was still patiently using it again and again. Yang Kai didn't believe that this was the only divine ability the other party had. He could see through it at a glance. It was nothing more than a surprise attack. Either the turbid fire had some kind of powerful transformation, or it had released another killer move that could subdue the enemy. Not to mention someone with extremely rich combat experience like Yang Kai, even a slightly more experienced opponent wouldn't be difficult to see through. It wouldn't be difficult to see through it. But after thinking about it, Yang Kai felt that it was only natural. According to what Sima Quan had heard, except for ghost ancestor Fire Mane, the other Gui ancestors had relied on the help of outer world forces and obtained many precious herbs to advance. At Gui ancestors level, there weren't many people who could be his opponent. Although he had heard that he had killed a few monster ancestors, it was likely that he had only been besieged at that time. Apart from that, there shouldn't have been many opportunities to fight. As for the heavenly ghost progenitor, although he was born a Gui ancestor, he hadn't experienced many battles. The reason why he was so difficult to deal with was that after reaching a certain realm, he would have an extremely strong sense of crisis and danger. He would be able to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, allowing him to make various choices that were beneficial to him in time. Facing the incoming turbid fire, Zhang Yan raised his hand and the black flames behind him suddenly rose before transforming into a palm and pressing down, shattering the turbid fire in an instant. The remaining momentum didn't diminish as he continued to rush forward. After suffering 2 losses, ghost ancestor Han Hui didn't just stand there and take a beating. Instead, he transformed into a streak of blood-red light and retreated. However, at that moment, the palm that was supposed to be coming at him from the front suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind him, smashing him into countless pieces of flesh and blood. This was another of Zhang Yan's strength path divine abilities, called Endless Strife. As long as his opponent was still within the range of his magic power, he could use his strength path divine abilities to attack from any direction with a single thought. The real power of this divine ability was that it was impossible to judge through one's eyes and ears, because there were no signs of this divine ability's transformation. Even someone with rich combat experience wouldn't be able to dodge this kind of attack if they weren't prepared in advance. It was just that Gui Zhu's vitality was too great and couldn't be burned away in such a short amount of time. If Zhang Yan only had one opponent in front of him at the moment, he could continuously release his demonic flames. Perhaps after 10 days or half a month, he could completely exhaust his opponent's vitality, but now he couldn't do so. At that moment, Yang Kai suddenly felt his body tighten. Looking up, he saw that the ghost face in the sky had become clearer and the suction force that had been shrouding him had suddenly increased by more than 10 times. Just now, although he had only fought with ghost ancestor Han Hui for 1 or 2 breaths, it had given ghost ancestor Mo Yang enough time to push the ghost face's power to its limit. At this moment, Zhang Yan had a feeling that if he released all of his strength, he would be sucked into the ghost face in the next instant. For the other party to reach this level of divine ability, the price he had to pay was not small. Ghost Ancestor Mo Yang had spent a lot of effort to wait for this moment. Suddenly, a pair of eyes appeared on his chest, but they had no pupils, only a dull gray color. After a short while, a bright light shone out. This was the Inai technique. No matter who was stared at by it for a few breaths, their body would be covered in a layer of death chi. This death chi would constantly suck away the opponent's vitality, and if one did not find a way to break it, it would not stop until the target died. Even Heavenly Ghost Ancestor did not dare to touch this divine ability, but it required the right timing to activate and it was not easy to hit an opponent. But right now, this was clearly a great opportunity. Zhang Yan grinned and his figure flickered, instantly breaking through the void and appearing in front of Ghost Ancestor Mo Yang in the blink of an eye. The latter was in the middle of activating his divine ability and did not expect his opponent to suddenly appear in front of him. Instinctively, he counterattacked, swinging his 8 arms. At this moment, the two were already very close. Zhang Yan did not dodge and instead threw a punch. As this force burst forth, the space in front of Ghost Ancestor Mo Yang continued to collapse. Ghost Ancestor Mo Yang could not dodge in time and his entire body exploded. Zhang Yan's blow not only contained a powerful force that shattered the void, but also contained black and purple flames that burned and swallowed any vitality it touched. The splashing vitality tumbled and twisted, as if it was about to be boiled. Even though Ghost Ancestor Mo Yang had an indestructible body, it would be difficult for him to recover before the aftermath was exhausted. Yang Kai glanced at it faintly before raising his hand and summoning countless black smoke chains from his back to lock the splashing vitality in front of him, trying to prevent it from recovering. On the other side, Ghost Ancestor Han Hun reformed his body at this moment, and upon seeing this scene, he immediately blew a turbid flame towards Zhang Yan. However, just like before, there was an extremely obscure Yin wind mixed within the flaming light. This Yin wind was called the instant separation chi, and could cut away the vitality of an enemy's physique in a few breaths. Even a monster ancestor, once struck by this technique, would immediately turn into a pile of bones. Only by slowly absorbing the essence of the sun and moon would they have a chance to awaken again. Although this chi was powerful, its flaws were not small. If it was used alone, almost any enemy could evade it. Fortunately, this technique could be fused with one's own fire chi. The previous few times Yang Kai had released his turbid flames to attack the enemy was to pave the way for this killer move. Zhang Yan raised his brow. He could sense that there was a trace of strangeness in this fire chi and knew that the other party had finally used this method. If he had not seen through the other party's purpose long ago, he might have overlooked it. Shifting his feet, Yang Kai easily dodged to a distance while at the same time, his divine sense sent out a giant hand that covered the sky, slapping the Gui ancestor away once again. Taking advantage of the fact that the demon phantom had yet to take form, Yang Kai slowly condensed it behind him and exerted a powerful suction force. In an instant, the mass of blood chi seemed to stop wriggling and froze in place. The heavenly ghost ancestor was connected to his 2 clansmen, so when he encountered a crisis, he immediately sensed it and spat out a strange syllable to dispel the attacks of the 2 sect masters in front of him. Then, he used his divine ability and ghost ancestor Han Hun immediately disappeared. However, Zhang Yan simply smiled and commanded the demon manifestation to change direction, aiming for the soul of ghost ancestor Mo Yang instead. The latter had yet to recover from the demonic flames, so he was completely powerless to resist. How could the heavenly ghost ancestor allow him to succeed? With a roar, he used his divine ability again to capture his clansmen, helping him escape this disaster. Sect Masters Qin and Yu had been waiting for this moment. Without waiting for the 2 ghost ancestors to be released, they simultaneously exerted force and a heavenly river of sword chi swept out. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he also turned around. Following his previous plan, he controlled his demon manifestation to suck in the heavenly ghost ancestor.